Redditors whose life was changed by a DNA test. What happened? Story 1. My life hasn't changed, but I was contacted by someone on 23andMe wondering if we're connected since he thought that he knew all his second cousins in the area. I recognized the surname as that of my biological grandfather. I answered this man's questions by detailing how my grandfather had gotten married to my grandmother pregnant out of wedlock. Then it turned out that he was already married with a family, forcing my father to be put up for adoption. I guess the guy didn't like that story and blocked me. Story 2. My mom took a DNA test, and she chose the option that allowed her to be connected with her family members. She has a half-brother, who was put up for adoption as he was the result of a fling her father had with an old girlfriend. The two were forced to break up because she was heavily religious and teen pregnancy was frowned upon, so she also had to give up the baby. My mother's side of the family never knew about him before this last year. My grandfather also managed to keep this a secret for 60+ years, which is kind of impressive. He's a pretty cool dude, and he looks and acts almost the exact same as my grandfather did. I'm so glad that my mother and he found each other. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to miss out on growing up with one of my siblings. I'm also happy for him for being able to find his biological family. Turns out he lived 20 minutes away from us his whole life, and we had no idea. We even went to the same family doctor. We also ended up helping him find and contact his mother, who gave him up, and everything turned out pretty well. The only downside is, after finding out about the whole thing, his wife got jealous of him spending his time with all this long-lost siblings and stuff, and they ended up getting a divorce. But he seems happier without her. And he just recently started dating another woman. Story 3. I was adopted at birth back in the 1960s. I had a happy childhood, but both my adopted parents died of cancer in the early 1990s. I sent my DNA to Ancestry in the hope that I'd make contact with one or both of my birth parents. All I had was my mother's name on the birth certificates and my father's name on a photocopied set of the adoption paperwork. When I first checked the results, I was disappointed to only find a few third or fourth cousins. I emailed the ones who looked as if they visited the site regularly. It turns out that they were all related to my birth father. He also died sometime in the early 1990s. Then one day I logged back onto the site and found that I'd matched with a first cousin. I sent a tentative email saying that I'd been given up as a baby and appreciated that this was a sensitive family matter, and that if he didn't want to get involved, then I was fine with that. But could he give some information about my family? He replied the next day and told me that he was my uncle, and that my mother was still alive. She had given birth to me as a teenager, but reluctantly had to give me up, as her family was religious and her birth dad was a deadbeat. He sent her a card saying sorry and a 20-pound note when he heard that she'd had me, then married someone else. I made contact with her by emailing earlier this year. It turns out that I have a half-brother and sister, as well as many nieces and nephews. We are taking things slowly at the moment, but after so many years, it's amazing to have a mother again. We have the same likes, dislikes, and politics. I'm hoping to meet up with her next year. Story 4. I ordered one of the earlier versions of 23andMe back in 2013. Looked through some fun generic traits and ancestral history, then forgot about it for a few years. Until one day in 2017 when I received an email that a close relative was discovered. The connection listed them as being first cousins, which was weird because I thought I had no immediate cousins, and no one in my family recognized the name. A few months later, another one was added, and finally a third from a couple of months after that. Turns out my uncle had multiple illegitimate children, and they all took DNA tests around the same time. All three of them found out that he was their dad thanks to my initial result connecting them and working together to compare family history. They're older, in their 30s to 40s, so it's more of a peace of mind at this point in their lives. But I'm glad that they were able to find their real dad through the experience. Why is everyone's dad so freaking Story 5. My family has been just my mom and I, and our dogs for a while now. I took one and pretty much got exactly what I expected. My mom took hers and it came back that she wasn't Jewish at all. This was extremely confusing because her father and his family escaped the Nazis. Her father was Jewish. She immediately knew that he wasn't her father. It was horrible at first. My mom felt devastated, as I'm sure you can imagine, she lost a part of her identity. She looked at the part that connects you to people in your family and found someone listed under a close relative whom she had never heard of. This person was listed as my first cousin from me, too. My mom's parents hadn't spoken to her in decades, so there was no asking them. She reached out to my close relative and found out that his parents lived in the next door to my mom's parents before my mom turned 1. My mom remembered the rumor that one of her cousins told her when she was little. Her mom had an affair with the next door neighbor. Turns out the next door neighbor was my mom's real father. He had 3 kids around my mom's age. One is 3 months younger than her, and 3 kids about 30 years younger. As you can see, he got around. He passed away a few years back, but the family welcomed us in with open arms. When we met them, it was an instant connection, like we'd been part of their lives forever. They brought up pictures, and boy does my mom look like her father. They told me that my grandpa would be so proud of me and my accomplishments. Some of our interests and talents aligned. They told us that we looked like the rest of the family, and we did. We had never had that before. My mom and I went from having only each other to her having 6 siblings, having nieces and nephews, and me having aunts and uncles and tons of cousins and a family reunion to go to each summer. I have family in 5 different states, little cousins to teach, and big cousins to look up to. My mom has a huge family, and so many people to call and talk to and ask how she's doing. It's amazing to watch. Weddings, birthday parties, and lots of love. Funerals, too. One of my uncles passed away, but I got a chance to meet him before he did. I think he was waiting to meet my mom and me. He was an amazing person, and even though I didn't know him for long, I loved him. My family has turned this into the best experience of my life, and my mom's too. Story 6. This is not exactly the type of DNA test people would expect, but I've suffered from pretty awful mental health issues since I was a child. Eating disorders, general/social anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorder, depression, and as of a few years ago, psychosis. By the time I was 16, I had been on well over a dozen different mental health medications with little to no help at all, and a lot of side effects. My mom's schizophrenia kicked in when I was 2 years old. She had it under control for a while, but as I grew up, I watched it take over her. She started with little things like putting the TV remote inside the fridge, and next I was having to put out fires and clean up her burn wounds. She'd try to cook directly on the stovetop with no pot or pan, and this would eventually lead me to having to lock myself in a room because the voices had told her she had to kill me. So when I turned 18 and started showing very mild signs of psychosis symptoms myself, my doctor was very diligent in getting it under control as fast as possible. Treatment was extensive, but part of getting better involved going through a clinical trial for my condition that involved having my DNA tested. I don't know exactly how it works, but they used my DNA to find out what medication would be the perfect fit for me to help with my mental health without having to deal with negative side effects. I still suffer from mental health, but more so anxiety symptoms than anything else, and have graduated from the psychosis intervention program I was in since my symptoms are almost entirely gone in that department. For a long time, one of my biggest fears was that my son would grow up like I did and watch my mom's sickness take control, but now I truly feel as though I am the one that is in control, and it's a great feeling. Story 7. My life hasn't changed, but it was made a little more complete. Found out, along with my dad, that when I was a teenager, my grandpa wasn't my real grandpa. My grandma, who survived her husband back in the early 90s, told us late in her life that her husband was sterile, so she slept with this other guy. Let's call him Tom Thompson. My dad had no idea and was in his late 40s when this news came to us. For 5 years off and on, I searched all public records to find any trace of this Tom Thompson and found literally nothing. My grandma was going senile, so although I believed she had an affair, I didn't believe all the info she spewed out about Tom being a war pilot and having done amazing adventures. Did my DNA test just for the hell of it last year and found out that Tom Thompson does exist, and he was a war pilot, and everything else she said about him checked out. I'm now connected to my cousins on my dad's side, and it's been warming to get closer to a family I never knew. Hey there, are you guys enjoying the video? Well then, if you are, just leave a like and subscribe, please, that would help us out a lot. Alrighty, back to the video. Story 8. I had a very rare cancer as a child. I was always worried that any children I might have would suffer the same fate. When my wife and I got serious about parenthood, I learned that there was a genetic test for the type of cancer I had. I submitted a sample and it came back completely negative for any cancer markers, meaning that my kids would essentially have no chance of developing the same disease. This was a relief, but at the same time, it meant that my cancer was completely spontaneous, which changed an incredibly rare cancer into an almost impossible cancer. This profoundly illustrated just how little control we humans have over our fate. Story 9. I have one full-blooded Native American ancestor. This did not change my life. What did was that through this, I was able to find parts of my birth family. And they had family lore that they were significantly Native American and sort of looked the part. I ended up telling them that they did have one ancestor, but one ancestor 5 generations back means nothing. Furthermore, my grandmother was forced into a marriage at 14 or 15 in some hick town in Idaho by her parents, who wanted their friend to have a companion. That friend was in his 30s. She had 3 children pop out before she was 20. In the dark of night, she escaped to California and married a new man that she lived with for the rest of her life. Their younger son is my father. I was able to get in touch with the children of the first marriage, and they had an attitude toward my grandmother that was not altogether undeserved. She did abandon them. After I added some context, they relaxed their judgments a bit. My heart goes out to your grandmother, and it's nice that her first kids didn't resent her as much. They probably didn't know the full story. Story 10. I had been searching for my biological father for 10 years. When I took my DNA test and I got the results back, I found out A. My bio father was 14 when I was born. B. My father was 20 when I was born. C. My father died when he was 24. D. He was murdered by his best friend. E. That there was a Lifetime original TV series with an episode dedicated to his murder. F. That I had a half-brother. G. My half-brother didn't know the person he called his dad his whole life wasn't his dad. Q. Existential crisis. Story 11. Growing up, I had 2 half-brothers and 3 half-sisters from my parents' previous marriages. I was told that my father's wife had cheated on him with another woman and he caught her, and that was the end of that. And my mom told me that he had caught her husband with another woman, so they divorced. They got married and had me, hence I was the only child they had together. The sister closest to me in age, she is 6 years older than me, got a DNA test done, and lo and behold, she is my full sister. We had asked my father numerous times after my mother died if she was my full sister, and he denied it till his dying day. She didn't get the test done until after he passed away, so my parents were having an affair for at least 6 years. It hasn't changed my life, though. I only have a relationship with my one brother, and that's just fine with me. Story 12. My mom did a DNA test for Christmas just to get a better understanding of her background. She's adopted, but has met her biological mother. Bio mom had previously given up the first name and nationality of bio dad, but did not have any other information through which we could find him. When the results of the test came back, they had a 99% match with a full name for a biological father. This person was a completely different name and nationality than what Biomom had told us. Also connected to this new father were the names of the woman that would be my mom's half-sisters. My mom reached out to the new bio dad and sisters with hopes that they would be willing to speak with her. One of the sisters responded, but unfortunately she says that her dad is a very private person, claims to have no recollection of meeting bio mom, and is not interested in talking to my mom. I feel horrible for my mom. It wasn't her fault that she was born, and it wasn't necessarily bio dad's fault that this happened and he didn't know. But it did happen, and I wish he would at least be open to talking to my mom. She doesn't want money or anything at all, just understanding of herself. Story 13. I grew up being told my father had died before I was born. When I was 14, my godmother got drunk one night and let it slip that my mom had been lying to me and my father was still alive and well and living in another state. I did some research and tracked him down. He said that he knew about me and had even met me once when I was 6 or 7, and he was a guest at one of my mom's parties. I have no recollection of this, and my mom had lots of parties and people in and out of her life. He said that he didn't think he was my father because it was a one-night stand with my mom, but he would submit to a DNA test to be sure. This was a long time ago, and I had to go through the family courts to get a paternity test back then, so obviously I had to tell my mom that my godmother had told me her secret. My godmother was furious with me and never spoke to me again. She died 8 years later, and she was a very wealthy woman with no children or close relatives left. I was originally going to inherit everything, and she always told both me and my mother that she was leaving everything to me. She changed her will and left everything to the church instead. The DNA test did prove that he was in fact my father. We tried to maintain a relationship for a couple of years, but he never really wanted a kid, or any effort toward a relationship on his part was half-assed. I haven't spoken to him since 2006. There was no falling out or argument during our last conversation, but when I hung up the phone after talking to him that day, I just decided that I wasn't going to initiate our next conversation like I always had before. I was just going to wait for him to call me. He never has, and my phone number hasn't changed. He has, though. He moved to a different state. It's your grandmother's fault that she got drunk and told you, no one else's. Most people finding out their father wasn't dead would have done the same thing, and you shouldn't have been led to believe he was dead in the first place. Story 14. So it wasn't my DNA test, it was my sister's. I had been feeling extremely sick for the past 2 years. Seizures, fainting, migraines, my stomach always bloated. My stomach constantly hurting and feeling like someone was pushing on it from the inside out. Eczema, tiredness, lactose intolerance, hair fell out and grew so slowly, diarrhea, and when I wasn't having diarrhea, constipation. I had only told the doctor about the seizure and fainting parts. I was embarrassed about the rest. They tested my heart and did electrocardiograms, sonograms, and blood tests. Everything came back fine, so they tried neurologically. I only had about 4 seizures and was mainly fainting, not having seizures. Well, they wanted to know if my fainting was mini seizures, so they did an electroencephalogram. I had 2 types of fainting, one where I felt my blood pressure drop, and another was when I had a migraine so painful that my body would just pass out from the pain. They hooked me up and sleep-deprived me to try and trigger one to happen. Well, I got one of my migraines and passed out. Woke up and asked for pain meds since it still hurts so bad. But they refused and I ended up passing out again. Well, after that, they said on the EEG machine that it was not seizures and that I'm fine. I could have told them that it wasn't a seizure. I told them it was a completely separate thing. They told me that it was all in my head and to go and see a psychiatrist. After that, it was a constant get a job and you're fine. We took you to the doctor and did every test in the world. You're fine. You're such a fucking hypochondriac. It's all in your fucking head from my parents. The turning point was when I had diarrhea every time I, farted. And it wasn't like a slight wet fart, it was like something turned on a faucet and I couldn't shut it off. I had to wear diapers for like 2 weeks straight. I had cut out dairy, so it wasn't that. I looked up food intolerances to try and fit this. Gluten came up and cut out gluten for a month. Everything felt better, even the fainting and migraine stopped. I was no longer in pain. My sister shows me her DNA test. And one of the things she had was one of the celiac genes. I had heard celiac was a form of gluten intolerance. I looked it up and found out that it wasn't just an intolerance, it was a full-on autoimmune disease. Every symptom fit. People who had the disease were eating gluten, some had reported fainting, and seizures were one of the symptoms because the autoimmune can cause epilepsy. Went to the doctor to do the blood test. You have to be eating gluten for 12 weeks to get an accurate test, so I went back on. I never realized how bad it had been. My driving was significantly impaired, I got confused easily and forgot where I was, and the brain fog was crazy. I couldn't drive, so I stopped and went to a gastroenterologist. He did a surgery where they put a scope down his intestine and took samples as well as a gene test. Came back positive for both genes and had damage to my intestines. My 2-year nightmare was over. I can drive now, work, and just live. And my parents can't call me a hypochondriac for it anymore. Story 15. I found out at 50 years that I was calling the wrong man dad. Mom denies doing anything wrong but admitted to an affair. I haven't spoken with my mom and now stepdad in nearly 2 years. I've been building a relationship with my newfound half-sister, aunt, and second cousin. They have been phenomenal. But he's still your dad, he's the one who raised you. These statements, although said with good intent, do not reflect how I grew up. Several $1,000s in DNA tests and 2 years of endless searching and sleepless nights. I wish I had never found him, but I'm glad I know. Story 16. Okay, so my mom is Korean and my dad says he's white. He is also quite racist. Yes, I understand the ridiculousness of that comment, whereas he does not. And was always raving about how he's Irish. I had the opportunity to make a DNA test for a study some friends of mine were doing at a university. I got the results in, and to the surprise of no one, I'm roughly half Korean. The big shocker was the other half. I was only about 11% Irish. The rest? A healthy percentage of Syrian. He tried to say it was my mom, and I then had the gleeful opportunity to point out that I didn't get 89% of my DNA from one person. Story 17. My dad took a DNA test because his family background was extremely confusing. We always heard that my father's father was a politician or a government worker from Nicaragua. Well, lo and behold, my grandmother was telling the truth, but never knew how to pronounce the politician's name as she was kidnapped and too young to pronounce/remember the sperm donor's name. This guy was an extreme big shot, very close to the Nicaraguan president. Nice to know who he is finally, but screw him for taking advantage of my grandmother. As a side note, pretty cool to know that 70% of my father's DNA is from Iberia.
What's the biggest plot twist you've seen in real life? Story 1. Met a dude at my local 24-hour fitness who was wearing a Shark Punch t-shirt. Since most people have no freaking clue about the band, I immediately decided I needed to talk to bro out with this dude about his particular taste in music, which was metal. We get to talking and find out he's a drummer, lives locally, and wants to start jamming to rock some music. Awesome. Exchange numbers and all that good stuff. Of course, however, actually meeting up with a reliable musician is much harder than it sounds, despite the enthusiasm. Around the same time, I was working security at a local bar and met this random cute girl who wasn't from the area, but was totally into me and wanted to hang out, exchange numbers and planned to meet up. When we finally did, we hit it off pretty well, but she had mentioned that she was still kinda dating around, but really liked me and hoped I was okay with that. Totally was okay with that because I was also doing the same thing. We hung out maybe another time, but then shortly after was hit with the "sorry, but I'm kind of dating this other guy for serious" line, and I said I understood and moved on. When the gym guy and I finally managed to get together and jam, a friend of his was there to play bass with us. We got introduced and started talking about random stuff, when the gym guy happened to mention to the buddy about the girl he was dating. He and I both started sharing our similarities and preference of people we date. And I asked to see what she looked like. He's like, "Sorry dude, she doesn't have any social media or anything like that. But I have a video of her at some restaurant we went to a few weeks back." He shows me the video. Me: "Oh, she's cute." Him: "Yeah, I met her smoking outside of some bar in LA." Me: "Dude, she totally reminds me of this girl I was dating not too long ago. What's her name?" Him: "Kim." Me: "Wait, really? That's so weird. I was dating a girl named Kim too. What are the odds? Hold up, she is a Snapchat, right?" Him: "Yeah. Why?" Me: "I start trying to find her on Snap. Dude, what's her name on there?" The friend at this time is looking at the both of us like, "Oh frick," and starts laughing. Both of us at the same time. Kimber Sleaze. The friend is dying of laughter at this point, and we both come to the realization that we are the same dude she ended up leaving and/or staying with. We still ended up jamming anyway. Story 2. I'm a medic, and one morning we had a call for an older woman. 70s if I remember right. She was having cardiac issues and was in compensated shock from a very low heart rate. From the time we got to her home to the time we were in the ambulance, she had gotten much worse. We paced her heart, and she was doing good the rest of the hour ride to the hospital. About 16 hours later, we got called for a rollover car accident. Get there, and we have one male in the service, unresponsive. The vehicle is upside down and off the road. We get him out. He's in very bad shape, wasn't breathing, so we intubated him. And off to the hospital we went. Almost to the hospital, which is 30 miles away. And he goes into traumatic cardiac arrest, dead when we get there. While we were on the way to the hospital, we found his wallet, since we didn't know who he was. We saw his badge, a retired police officer, and I remember from the morning, our patient's husband was a retired officer. He was on the way to see his wife. Unfortunately, he stopped by the bar first. While it wasn't my job, I went to the nurse to talk to the wife and let her know what happened. She thanked me for being there for her family so much that day. Story 3. I have a coworker, Joe. A great guy who has an equally great wife, Nina. Over the years, and even prior to meeting Joe, multiple doctors told Nina she would be unable to get pregnant on her own due to problems with her ovaries and fallopian tubes. She and Joe decided that a child-free life was okay with them, so she and Joe married and lived happily for 12 years. When they started out, they didn't have much, but as time passed, they progressed in their careers and made a nice life for themselves. Finally, they got to the point where they were comfortable enough to buy a sports car for themselves, something Joe always wanted to do. It was the first new off-the-lot car they ever owned. Now Joe and Nina were in their early 40s at this time and figured they'd just coast on into retirement. Well, about 6 months after they bought their car, winter came. Nina got a case of the flu she just couldn't seem to shake. She just felt run down and nauseous, just not herself. After about 3 weeks of this, she went to the doctor. The doctor asked if there was any possibility she could be pregnant. She laughed at him and said, "I've been married for 12 years now and haven't had so much as a scare." Multiple doctors said, "It's just not going to happen for me. No way." But her doctor said, "Humor me and let me rule it out. Just do a urine test." Well, wanting to figure out what was going wrong with her ASAP, Nina peed on the stick, and you guessed it, pregnant. So, in their 40s and with 12 years of living just the two of them, they were expecting. After the initial shock wore off, they were actually pretty excited even though they had to sell the sports car since a two-seater wasn't really going to work for them. A few months later, their son John came into the world the usual way, a happy, healthy baby. So they became a family of 3, and they still are today. John just finished his first year of high school. Great kid and super smart too. You just never know what life's going to throw at you. Story 4. 1991. I'm 19, just signed the lease for my first solo apartment, just got the first paycheck for my new job, and I deposited the paycheck at an ATM. Another first. I'd always gone to the bank to do it. 2 weeks later, I get my bank statement in the mail and see with horror I only have $1.87 in my account. Way wrong. I should have at least $200. I've been very careful with my spending. I came within $2 of bouncing my first rent check. I'm literally reaching for the phone to call the bank when the phone rings. It's the police asking if my ATM card was stolen. I check my wallet and the card is missing. My job at a theater pub came with cash tips, so I didn't use the card often. And tell them I was going to call them anyway because I was missing $200 from my account. "Well, we've got your card and your $200, so come down to the police station," they tell me. I can't figure out how they have my card and the cash. Doesn't make sense. I drove down there. The detective says someone, let's call him Bob, pulled in to use an ATM and saw a man acting suspiciously while he was doing it, moving back and forth as if trying to dodge the camera. Bob says the man left the ATM, got into the car, and drove away at high speeds as if fleeing. Bob then went to the ATM and put his card in, which popped out. Bob then withdrew $200 and then another ATM card popped out. My card. Bob's card had popped out because the crook had left my card in the ATM before speeding away. Bob realized he had withdrawn the money from my account and not his. So he brought my card and the cash to the police and reported the attempted theft. The detective gives me the description of the cook. According to Bob, it was a man of 5'7", with brown hair and round gold-rimmed glasses. I say out loud, so about my height, my hair color, and glasses like mine, before realizing Bob was describing me. I'd never deposited a check in the ATM before, so I was moving back and forth following the instructions on the screen, filling out the envelope with my account number, punching the amount in, etc. And then forgot to take my card out and just left because I'm a freaking idiot. I drove away at high speeds because I was 19 and that's how I drove everywhere. Worried the detective might be annoyed, I didn't tell him I was the crook. I just thanked him and left with the money I stole for myself. Somewhere in a box in my closet, I still have the police report, where I'm both the victim and the perp. Story 5. A guy I knew in high school English class was talking one winter day about how he was late to school because someone hid his mailbox. His folks made him fix it up before he went to school. He missed his ride and had to walk instead, but the school staff was cool about it and didn't punish him. A few minutes later, another girl comes into class and she's talking about how her morning sucked. She lost control going down a hill and hit someone's mailbox. She freaked out and drove off before anyone witnessed it and described a few details of the house. The mailbox guy puts 2 and 2 together and blurts out, "You hit my mailbox." He wasn't super mad about it and she turned beet red. It was hilarious at the time the way they both reacted. Story 6. Was on a flight from Paris to Boston. Had the aisle seat across from a little hall of bathrooms in the middle of the plane. At one point, a man a few rows up goes into a bathroom and after a couple of minutes comes out and is just standing in the aisle, so it gets my attention. He keeps going in and coming back out, looking up toward where he is sitting. I see a woman who is sitting next to his empty seat shake her head at him, but he doesn't give up. Finally, after like 5 times of coming in and out, he finally gets the woman to come back there. The lights are out and most of the plane is sleeping. Once she comes back to him, they start making out in the bathroom hallway before he goes into one and pulls her in with him. They're in there for quite a while, and then he comes out and goes back to his seat. A few minutes later, she comes out and does the same. They are really flirty in their seats, and about an hour later repeat it. The man goes in and she joins him. They end up doing this 3 times throughout the flight. My husband, who is sitting next to me, has caught on to what they are doing as well, and we made a joke about how they must be newlyweds on their honeymoon. We get off the plane, and the woman is standing at the gate waiting, and the man is nowhere in sight. As the people from the back of the plane get off, a completely different man goes up to her, gives her a kiss on the lips, and asks her if she could get any sleep on the flight, and calls her dear. Then they walk off towards the luggage area with their arms around each other. So apparently what we thought was an adventurous newlywed couple was actually a woman hooking up with her seatmate while her husband was sitting in the back of the plane. Story 7. I worked for a bank at their call center as a workforce admin. We had a supervisor with a higher than normal personnel rotation. People would be doing okay, then suddenly their numbers would drop and quit. In one of those, the guy quitting made a big freaking scene, called him out, insulted him, pushed him around, and ended up being restrained by other coworkers. At the HR meeting, the supervisor is going off on this guy, bringing up every single thing the guy did wrong. He was boasting a bit too about how he had to fix all the dude's mistakes. The entire time, the guy sat silent, said nothing, and just stared at whoever asked him something. When the HR rep asked if he had anything to add, he pulled out a tape recorder and just played recording after recording. Of what, you ask? Of the supervisor literally threatening the guy, harassing him, belittling him, and overall being a complete douche. Apparently, this guy would target overperforming agents and make their working environment hell in order to protect his position. I'm told the supervisor simply stared at his feet and nodded when told he was fired. The agent, as I understand it, was also let go, but very well compensated. Story 8. For a semester in high school, my English teacher set up this game where one student was a secret killer. Every couple of days, the kid would sneak a note into the classmate's locker, backpack, textbook, or whatever that says you've been killed. My best friend and I were trying harder than anyone else in the class to play detective on this, especially near the end of the semester. Near the end of school, there were about 6 students left alive, and it turns out my best friend was the killer the whole time. They took the last 6 students who were alive and brought them in front of the class one at a time so we could all debate if he or she was the killer or not, and the person could plead their case. The teacher brings my friend up and says, "Okay, tell us what happened." And my friend starts explaining how he had to be very sneaky and so on. So there was a good 20 seconds where I just didn't understand what he was talking about. There wasn't any great reveal or drumroll. He just brought him in front of the class and started explaining how he killed everyone. I lost my mind. The other twist that I forgot to mention is that in week 2 or 3, he went to a student whom he didn't really talk to much and told him that he was the killer and that he needed him to kill me. So he hands him a few of the notes, and from then on, he had a guy on the inside helping him kill people. That's why he could kill so many people without being caught. Because if someone got killed, I was with my friend so I could vouch for him. The teacher said there was nothing in the rule book that said you couldn't get another person to help you kill people. It was a huge gamble because the other kid could have just said, "I caught the killer," and the game would have been over. I forgot to mention that if you guess who the killer is, nothing happens. You have to catch them in the act. So when there are only a few people left, everyone is yelling, "You're the killer," and pointing fingers back and forth. Story 9. Little town I grew up in had these 2 car dealerships on opposite sides of town. One Chevy and one Ford. They were bitter rivals. Attack ads, trash-talking salesmen, billboard wars, you name it. When the owner of the Chevy dealership died, it came out that he'd also owned the Ford dealership by way of a shell company. No one saw that coming, including many of the higher-ups who worked at the dealerships. Story 10. My esthetician was giving a Brazilian wax to a new client. The new client goes on and on about this new guy she's dating and how he's a bartender at XYZ. Esthetician's boyfriend was the bartender. Always fun to find out you're knee-deep waxing the pussy of a woman you are being cheated on with. Story 11. I graduated from law and got engaged to the girl I'd been with through university. We both applied for the same graduate program and ended up working in the same office in Canberra. 3 months before our wedding, I found out she was cheating on me with our mutual boss, and I broke it off with her. Long story short, it got really ugly, and the two of us ended up in a very bitter court case over the property. Canberra is a pretty small city, and the legal world is pretty bloody small there too. And everywhere I went, I bumped into my ex. It was beginning to seriously get me down, her too as it transpired, and I applied for an Australian government overseas development job in Tuvalu, a Pacific island with about 11,000 population. It's quite a prestigious job to get, with only 2 positions offered for a 2-year contract on a rotating basis. I was successful in the application and moved on island to start my posting, to discover that my ex was the other successful applicant. I spent the next 2 years sharing in a tiny office on a tiny island with the person that I quite honestly loathe more than any other in the world. Story 12. Studying abroad in England. I planned a weekend trip to Barcelona with this girl. These are pre-cell phones. I overslept, got to the airport like 3 hours late. As soon as I arrived, there was the girl. At the exact same time we both say, "I am so sorry." Wait, what are you sorry for? Turns out she overslept too. British Airways changed our tickets for us at no charge, and we got to Barcelona a few hours late. I think the real plot twist is the fact that the airline didn't charge for switching the flights. Story 13. Was at a big art show with my wife and kid, 3 or 4 at the time. We were walking up to a doorway, and I noticed a couple of huge nude statues. I mean, like, no big deal to me, but I was worried about what the kid was going to say because he's a bit of a loudmouth at the best of times, and I didn't need him yelling about private parts in the middle of a crowded art gallery. I realized the worst thing to do was make any kind of scene about it, no covering eyes or anything. Just subtly angling the stroller away from the statues and making a big deal about art things on the opposite side of the aisle. Then the inevitable happens. I remember it happening in slow motion. The kid's head turns toward the naked statues. Eyes widened, arm raises, and finger points. Mouth slowly opens. "Dad, look at those statues. They aren't wearing any socks." Story 14. A friend of mine apparently was sneaking out for a trip outside the city with his friends since his parents didn't let him go. They were on motorbikes, already on their way outside of the city. Suddenly, he got into an accident with another motorbike. It was his dad he crashed into. Story 15. I used to work with a guy in his early 20s who at the time of the story was getting ready to go with his family for his first out-of-town country trip. He was pretty damn excited, and we were getting the play-by-play of all the things. Where they were staying, what they were going to do. He was preparing. Specifically, he would need to get a passport, but his birth certificate had been lost. When the replacement one had arrived, Mom's name isn't the woman he called Mom his whole life. It was his sister. Turns out his sister had him super young, and his grandparents basically took him on and raised them as their son, and no one ever told him the truth. So sister was actually Mom, and Mom and Dad were actually Grandpa and Grandma. The real dad is unknown. He took a few days off work to sort himself out, still went on the trip, still apparently had a blast. Story 16. I was a Starbucks barista before the whole names on cups thing was big, or at least it wasn't really appreciated in my tiny store. There was this very cute guy who came in maybe 4 to 6 times a week, a little often but nothing out of the ordinary. I flirted like mad. He flirted back. It was all great. Then he comes in with his fiancée. I was betrayed and treated him coldly from then on. A month later, 2 of them come in together and I find out that they are twins, and I'd shot down any chance I had with the single one. It sounds a bit like how my mother and dad met. My dad is a twin. Both he and his brother were members of the same fraternity when they were in college. My uncle was the social chair for the fraternity. One day, my dad is going to his car when this girl stops him and chews him out for not providing rides to the social event for the girls in her sorority. My dad patiently waited until she was done and then told her she could tell that to my uncle. The girl was mortified, so much so that my dad decided to make it up to her by taking her out. And that is how my dad met my mom. Story 17. I knew a woman who was going through divorce proceedings with her husband. He was always argumentative and borderline abusive towards her, certainly always shouting and demeaning. Then, just as the divorce was entering its final stages, he very suddenly died. His autopsy showed that he had a massive undiagnosed brain tumor. that had been physically altering his personality. His wife felt all kinds of guilt afterward and took it out on everyone she talked to and lost a lot of friends in the process. My wife's uncle is an incredibly nice guy who absolutely adores his wife. We started hearing about marital issues. He was becoming more and more argumentative, and then he hit her. They separated. He harassed her to the point that she got a restraining order. He defied the restraining order and was put in jail. In jail, his issues got him a medical evaluation. Turns out he had a brain tumor. They removed it. He returned to normal and was released from jail. They're back together with him back to his wife adoring self. Story 18. I got laid off from a company I'd worked for over 20 years. I went in for my exit interview, and the HR lady said, "Dwayne, from a site 3 states away, wants to hire you." I said I'm not moving that far. She said you can just work from home. Now, where I was working on a 130-mile round-trip commute, I got laid off and ended up with a commute that was from my bedroom to my den. Kept doing it for over 4 more years. Story 19. My grandfather's funeral. He was always a fairly reserved and distant father as far as I understood, would fit the stereotype of a northern dock worker who comes home expecting dinner to be on the table and then goes to the pub all evening via the bookies. Anyway, an unsurprising heart attack later, we're all gathered for his funeral. We're a big but close family, so we know everyone, including his friends. However, one guy turns up, about the same age as my dad, who nobody knows. Long story short, it turns out it was my grandfather's son, from another family, from another marriage, that went on for as long as his marriage to my grandmother. My grandfather had maintained 2 marriages over 40 years, having 7 children with my grandmother and just 1 with his other woman. They knew about our family and kept away, and apparently my grandmother knew about them but kept quiet. Turns out he wasn't going to the pub every night. Your grandmother knew? That must have been very difficult for her. Story 20. I work at a prison, and a lady flew all the way from Nigeria to visit her brother who was supposed to be incarcerated at my unit. She speaks little English, but we tried to explain to her that the inmate was not in the system anymore. He must have been released. We called a supervisor, and it turns out he was released over 5 months before. She walks away confused and comes back in with her husband, who speaks English much better. We tell him the scenario, and he asks, where did he go? He doesn't have any friends or family in the US. We told him we don't know where he went. He was released. He could be anywhere. The guy, obviously confused, says, well, he couldn't have gone anywhere because he doesn't have any legs. So a legless Nigerian ex-felon with no ties is running and scooting around the US, and no one knows where he is. Story 21. A few years ago, I got invited to a friend's engagement party. They were throwing a huge bash because they were planning on a very small destination wedding. Later in the evening, my friend's fiancé takes the mic and starts thanking everyone for being there. Sorry, Jen will be out to thank you guys in a minute. She's just having a wardrobe malfunction. He goes on to tell the story about how they met, how they were best friends and decided to get engaged, and finished along the lines of, we wish you could all be there and that we could get married right now. So we're going to. Out walks Jen in her wedding dress.
Have you ever experienced a plot twist in real life? Story 1. So sometime last year, I got a friend request on Facebook from this girl I don't know. We have some friends in common, and her profile says she had gone to the same university and was in the same program, just a few years before me, so I figure we must have met at some party or something and accepted the request. Flash forward to July. Moved to a new city for a new job, and on my first day, bam, there's the girl who added me on Facebook. We ended up dating for a few months too. Turns out she had added me because one of our bosses has literally the exact same name as me, and she thought she was adding him to Facebook. I always thought it was a really bizarre situation. Story 2. Not a huge plot twist, but I did find this occurrence that happened to a friend rather amusing. The friend who lives on campus near me had 5 other roommates, each with their own rooms, of course. One of the roommates was a Chinese guy who for a while had been acting strangely. He alternated between being really friendly and being cold and unsure. He'd never open his door completely when people knocked and would sometimes forget things that he'd said when referenced later. His English skills would fluctuate wildly, and he would sometimes change his clothes oddly halfway through the day. He would also usually spend all his time inside his room. He'd also make himself a rather large amount of meals throughout the day. After 6 months of this strange behavior, but largely not worth asking about, one day my friend came back from a class, opened the door which was next to the kitchen, looked to the side into the kitchen, and there were 2 of the odd-acting roommates staring back at her. Deer in the headlights style. Turns out he'd been hiding his twin brother in his room since he'd arrived and thought that the roommates would report him to the university if they found out. So they took turns to leave the room or watch if the coast was clear before they both came out, alternated cooking meals one at a time, etc., etc. Story 3. My little brother hitchhikes a lot. He was trying to hitch to Valdez, Alaska to run a half marathon there before hitchhiking to my parents' house near Fairbanks. He gets picked up near Seattle by a woman. They're chatting, and my brother is telling her the story of how he rode his bike from Alaska to Argentina. The woman says her neighbor's son had done the same thing. Turns out she was my parents' next-door neighbor. Story 4. So when my grandmother died, we all found out that when she was 13 in Argentina, her older brother, which none of us knew existed, became psychotic and was hospitalized in a mental institution. Remember, this is the 1930s Argentina. Over time, my grandma lost touch with her brother, moved overseas, and so on. It was always her secret shame that she abandoned her brother. Her brother, apparently, later died while still hospitalized, alone. Fast forward 70 years later, grandma died and my father goes to Argentina, we live in Israel now, to meet with family and find and pay respects to said uncle's grave. He starts going from cemetery to cemetery, searching for his uncle's grave. He can't find it. Maybe he was cremated? So he starts going from mental hospital to mental hospital. Of course, we don't know where he was hospitalized. Searching through records, soon enough, he picks up on a 70-year-old trail and follows his uncle from hospital to hospital, some of which closed down decades ago. Finally, he reaches modern times, and plot twist, finds his uncle alive and well, 96 years old, in a Buenos Aires mental hospital. Anyway, long story short, my dad took him out of the hospital, put him in a supported living environment, and got him 90% of the meds they had him on. Thus emerged a relatively stable but still schizophrenic old man. Epilogue. Recently, he called my aunt and said, "Susan, did you know that America has a black president?" Story 5. I played EverQuest about 10 years ago and joined a guild. There was this dreamy high elf cleric who was always playing at the same time as me. Who am I kidding? Everyone played all day on EverQuest. Anyways, we always played together, sometimes out things, sometimes just sitting around in the city talking. Over the course of 6 months, this woman became my reason for logging on. We eventually got married in the game, which her real-life husband, who also played the game, didn't think was that funny. We were very close, and she told me many details about her personal life and her husband. It felt like I was in the shotgun end of an affair, but I didn't know any better. It felt great talking to her. My head was in the clouds. Anytime she signed on, my mood improved and I looked forward to it every day. Eventually, she sent me pictures of herself. She was a pretty blonde-haired woman of 27 years old, a 1 on the binary scale, the only honest rating system. She asked me for pictures in return, but I said no because it would be weird for a 12-year-old boy to send pictures of himself over the internet. I don't think she saw that coming, and I don't think I ever saw her again. Story 6. I walked into a new job on my first day, walked up to a guy and introduced myself. He says, "No time to waste," and assigns me a few weird tasks and I start on them. I'd been working for an hour when my phone rang, and it was from the job that I just started. I answer and the guy on the phone says, "You are aware today is your first day?" I said, "Yes, I'm actually here. David gave me some stuff to do." The guy on the phone says, "Who's David?" Apparently, a complete stranger just started telling me what to do, and I didn't think twice about it. We had a pretty good laugh. Story 7. Someone I knew at university was talking to his new girlfriend about the Glastonbury Festival, a huge music festival here in the UK with around 150,000 attendees. He went every year, and it transpired out that she did too, and had been going for years. After a while, they started comparing photos that they'd taken over the years. My friend pulls out a picture from his first visit to the festival. He's sitting on a fence with his back to a field. There are only 2 other people in the picture, a girl sitting about 20 feet away with her back to him, and her friend who is taking her picture. His girlfriend realizes that she was also there for the first time that year, and pulls out a picture. In it, she's sitting in a field. The only other people in the picture, out of 150,000 other people at the festival, are a guy sitting on a fence with his back to her and his friend, who is taking his picture. Story 8. Kay is my female bisexual friend. Jen was her bisexual girlfriend. Andre is Kay's boyfriend. Brian is Jen's boyfriend. A new friend Kay is dating a woman named Jen. Jen is super weird. Clingy, demanding, always accusing Kay of being shady, etc. Even accused Kay of being in a relationship with me, also female. One day I asked Kay, "So, tell me how you met Jen." Kay and Jen met on a study abroad trip. Jen was romantically interested in Kay, but Kay wasn't really reciprocating. Jen was totally cool with it, and they became good friends. In fact, during the trip, Jen introduced Kay via email to her cousin, Andre, male. Andre and Kay totally hit it off and start an online relationship complete with exchanging pics, etc. Andre sends Kay gifts when she returns home, including expensive jewelry. Andre also hooks up Jen with his friend Brian. Everyone is happy. Until one day, Jen finds out from a mutual friend that Andre and Brian are dead. They ran off together in a gay love affair and ended up on drugs just weeks before Andre was supposed to come to meet Kay in person for the first time. In their shared grief, Kay and Jen started a relationship together. Wow, quite the freaky story. In fact, I decided it sounds insane and start doing some digging. I found the picture of Andre that he sent her in a random Google search. I looked for any stories of this torrid gay love affair gone awry in a hotel drug binge. Nada. All sorts of weird. So I say to Kay, have you ever thought that maybe Andre doesn't exist? She is remarkably interested and not upset. We go to Andre's old email account. We get in using Jen's password. Yes, they share passwords because Jen didn't trust Kay. Kay loses her mind. Jen had created Andre and the whole story, complete with fake pictures, paying a male cousin of hers to have phone conversations with Kay, getting nude pictures, etc., etc. During the Andre relationship, Kay's mother died unexpectedly, and Andre paid for all of Kay's expenses to make it home for the services, etc. It was Jen the whole time. This was long crap too. Over a year of this crap. So Kay emailed Jen from the grave of dead Andre's account and forced her to confess, after which Jen threatened to kill herself. So Kay called the police who took her to the hospital. And then Kay got a restraining order and they never saw each other again. Bonus detail. Jen even had someone, may have been Jen herself, call Kay pretending to be Andre's aunt to tell her how sorry she was that he had died, that he loved her, etc., etc. Also supposedly during this drug binge, Andre had Brian cut each other's testicles with plastic forks. Hell of a drug. Kay is married to a real person. I've met him and has a daughter now. This incident was several years ago. Story 9. I started working at Home Depot around 2005 and was somewhat of an introvert. I graduated in 2004 and really struggled to break out of the high school mentality, not have a set group of friends to hang out with. So I start at Home Depot and a guy, Nick, I work with invites me out drinking. I'm only 19 at the time, but he's a few years older. We ended up becoming very good friends, but haven't necessarily reached the emotional stuff beyond chicks. Fast forward a few months and my stepmom's mother died. Pretty bleak stuff, and I really just have my family to talk to, which of course isn't the same at all. I'm kind of struggling. My buddy Nick is drifting away as well and the day of the funeral comes. It's towards the end and I walk up to say my final goodbyes, look over, and Nick is there staring at me dumbfounded. We high-five, hug, and find out he's my stepmom's nephew. And we were both drifting away because we didn't have anyone to bring real crap to, outside of family. Been best friends since. Story 10. I was pretty stoked to open an email from a secret admirer in my senior year of high school. Every day for almost 2 weeks I'd receive a new note listing what she thought were my best qualities. How she was too shy to admit her feelings to me in person, and she'd finally reveal herself at the big dance coming up that Friday. The emails became more and more forthcoming as the end of the week approached, and finally, culminated with a clue about how to figure out who she was. These are the only species besides humans that have sex for pleasure. I totally thought I was getting laid with a clue like that. I was a heavier set lineman on the football team and kind of a class clown, which meant despite my lack of confidence, I was always in with the popular crowd. So as we pre-drank from the dance, I took a few of my friends to be on the lookout for something dolphin-related. Word spread quickly, and by the time we arrived, I had a huge group trying to help me solve the mystery. A teammate of mine found out as the night went on that Adrian, this cute girl I sat next to in social class, had a temporary dolphin tattoo on her left shoulder. After some prodding by my friends, I went over to her and the group of girls she was with. A slow song started as I sheepishly asked for a dance. With the entire school watching my 2-week-long mystery reach its climax, she leaned in close and whispered in my ear, "You're an asshole sometimes," promptly followed with a slap across the face. I'd never felt that level of confusion and embarrassment. She'd orchestrated the whole thing because she didn't like my class clown demeanor in social class. I still hate dolphins. Story 11. I was job searching in my early 20s. I get to this job interview and the guy didn't know I was coming. He grudgingly walks me into his office and starts asking me questions. I had been to many interviews. I just wasn't in the mood for someone to make me feel like I wasn't welcome. He asks me why I want to work here, and part of my answer is, I like to help people. He responds with, bullcrap. I am surprised, but I can tell this is going nowhere. The rest of the interview is formal and I end with a sarcastic, sorry to bother you. I get back to my apartment and I'm feeling down. I received a voicemail asking where I was for my interview. They say if I'm still interested in a callback. I compare the name, number, and company with a business card I was given, and it turns out I was on the wrong floor. I just walked into a random company and was given an interview. But yeah, I didn't get either jobs. Story 12. A pretty major one when I was young. My parents were divorced and I lived with my mother. Life was pretty normal until around 4th grade, when my mother began telling me she suspected people had been following us. This happened often, and each time her stories escalated. By 5th grade, I wasn't allowed to talk about where we were going after entering the car, and I had to change in my closet because there were cameras in the house. At this point, I began to mistrust my friends after being informed by my mother their parents were plotting against us. We began moving from place to place, evading the stalkers, but each time they followed us to the new city. Finally, 2 months into 6th grade, I was called to the office for my 4th grade science class. Once there, I was picked up by my father, who I hadn't seen for months. He gained custody of me and took me home straight from school. During the ride home, he told me my mother had been a paranoid schizophrenic since she was young and had been neglecting her medication for the past couple of years. It was hard to believe at first that all the hardship I thought we'd been going through was entirely made up, but I grew to accept it as I got older. I haven't seen my mother since the morning I left for school. Story 13. Happened to a friend of mine. She had been feeling lonely for months and had found a guy she really got on with after meeting him gaming. Sadly, they lived too far apart to meet face to face. Few months of them getting closer until he asks her out. They start e-dating. She confesses to me that she really likes him, and she's saving money to go visit. Fast forward 14 months. She saved the money, she's booked the flight, she's going to meet the man she loves. Everything is perfect. And she's flying out the very next day. Cue me getting a hysterical call late at night. It's hard to decipher what she's saying. I get her to slow down and take it easy. He's not him. I ask for clarification. He's not him, she cries. I'm still confused. I don't get it. What does that mean? He lied about what he does or his age or something? I asked. She replied, No, he lied about who he is. What he is. He's not him. He is a she. He's not Michael. She's Michelle. Turns out the girl was a lonely lesbian who looked a bit butch if appropriately dressed or made up for the webcam, and who's been using pictures of her brother the entire time for everything else. Sadly, she almost had a nervous breakdown and ended up with serious trust issues and a medium-sized case of homophobia. Story 14. A few years ago, I was in a longboarding accident and got a pretty bad concussion. The concussion caused me to forget pretty much that whole day, but my friends explained to me what happened. They told me that I had gotten scared of going too fast and tried to jump off the longboard. For 2 years, they ridiculed me for jumping off because jumping off a longboard is not the smartest thing to do when you want to get off. I lived with the ridicule until my best friend told me that I was pushed off by one of my friends. This isn't that big of a twist, but it really showed me the loyalty of my friends. I quickly left that group and became friends with the kids that play Dungeons and Dragons and look at Reddit. I must say, I like this group a lot more. Story 15. So technically this story didn't directly involve me, but it's pretty good as far as out-of-left-field twists go. There was a kids' baseball league in a town in Texas. They would have games a few times per week. The head and assistant coaches are dads of kids who play. During a game, the dad of one of the low-skill kids gets worked up because his son is only playing the league minimum innings. The coach refuses to play the sucky kid more because he doesn't want to risk pissing off everyone by throwing the game. The parent gets angrier and angrier, until by the end of the game he's busting at the seams. After the game, the guy confronts the head coach in the parking lot and takes a swing at him. They start fighting and rolling around on the ground. The wife of the head coach shows up at this point and starts screeching at the parent to get off her husband. The twist, she doesn't know the context of the fight and, only going off of the info she has, screams, "Quit fighting my husband! It's the other coach that's been sleeping with your wife." The expression when that guy froze was priceless. Story 16. So a friend once had a girlfriend and the relationship was kind of brutal. After a while, she moved back to her hometown, 2 hours north of Stockholm. As a friend, things seemed to be turning for the better as it seemed they were going their separate ways, and she dropped the pregnancy bomb on him. Out of guilt, duty, or love, I don't know. He decides to try to make it work as he moves to her town and tries to start a life there. The plot twist was that she wasn't pregnant. This wouldn't be so bad, unless it was for the fact that she encouraged him not to use protection. This in turn resulted in her being knocked up for real. As if she hadn't messed him over enough, she revealed after a few months into the pregnancy that she was a lesbian and had a girlfriend on the side. Really sounds like something out of one of those bad shows on TV, and needless to say, my buddy was in shambles upon returning to Stockholm to start anew. Story 17. I used to know a guy named Ben. Ben was the biggest two-faced dude I'd ever known. He once met a girl online and went out to meet her and returned a few days later. When asked about her, his female friends, he said that there was no spark, no chemistry, whatever. To his guy friends, he would say that she was ugly so he couldn't stand to look at her. Ben hated ugly women. Ben and I lived together briefly, and my overweight girlfriend, later wife and now ex-wife, stayed with us frequently. She was friendly with him, would hang out with him while I was at work, and frequently drove him around if he needed. As soon as she was gone, though, he would laugh about how fat she was. Ben hated fat women. Years and years pass. I'm an OkCupid one day, and I see a new member. She looks vaguely familiar. I look at her photos, and it hits me. Ben, who was already unattractive, gained a bunch of weight and became transgendered. In essence, he became a fat, ugly woman. The very thing he hated the most. The end. Or is it? Transgendered Ben briefly dated a lesbian friend of mine who lives with my ex-wife and would come to hang out not knowing he was in the house of the woman he would only a few years before making fun of for being fat. His relationship with the lesbian didn't last, needless to say. Story 18. My ex-girlfriend's mom was in hospice care, dying of cancer, when she told her son, my ex's brother, that the man she was married to, the man that raised him his entire life, was not his biological father. This was news to everyone involved. It was later confirmed through testing. Without going into details, the man who raised my ex-brother was not the most attentive father, nor all that warm and kind. He was a bit of a drunk, they got divorced, and the kid was a big-time troublemaker. The final twist came shortly after their mom passed. The non-bio dad took the kid hunting and told him that he didn't care, but he was his son, that nothing and no one was going to take that away from him. Coming from that man, it was huge, and no one expected it. They became extremely close after that, and last I heard, they still visit each other several times a week. Story 19. Well, mine was in high school. It started with me being dumped by my then first girlfriend, and cue me being a bitter 14-year-old who proceeded to love and hate her. We end up both essentially hating each other and get into an argument where I'm rather mean. She gets pissed off with me and says she's going to get her cousin to beat me up. I go on MSN a few days later and he adds me, but doesn't really seem to want to hurt me. He just wants to find out why his cousin wants him to beat me up. I explain, he laughs it off and starts to befriend me a bit. We end up talking for a while and I meet up with him and with other friends. We hit it off a little too well, and within a few days of hanging out with him, the guy who was supposed to beat me up ends up with me. I assumed I was straight up until this point. I realized I'm bi and got into a semi-serious relationship with him, and my ex, who thinks we made a nice couple, stopped hating me, and we became friends. I ended up breaking up with him and stuff, but I like the story because if people find out I'm bi, which no one ever guesses, and ask me how I came out, I get to tell them this gem of a story. Story 20. So my friend told me about this one. Her best friend was dating this guy and they were pretty sure they had found the one with each other. This guy was all ready to propose and was picking out rings, so these two decide to have a He chooses his ex-girlfriend. At this point, any guy with a shred of common sense should know this is probably going to end badly. But this is where the twist is. The girlfriend enjoyed it a little too much and broke up with him to date his ex-girlfriend. What happened by total accident but changed your life completely? Not my life, but my neighbor's. From an early age, I spent a lot of time with my neighbor, James, who was 2 years younger than me. We would play football together all the time. One random day, a few of us neighborhood kids were hanging out on the sidewalk, waiting for James to finish his dinner so we could play. James's dad was always a bit strange, from what I remember. I don't think he had a job at the time. Anyway, we were waiting for James to be done with dinner when his dad came outside. He walked up to us. There were 3 boys, and started yelling at us to leave his property and that James wouldn't be coming out after dinner. I was a bit of a troublemaker back then, so I told him that we were on a public sidewalk. Without warning, he mumbled some words to me, which I don't remember, and then threatened me. Of course, I went home and told my parents what happened. They called the police, and about 4 hours later, around 10 at night, the police actually handcuffed James's dad right in front of my window and took him away. James's mom filed for divorce and later married a strength coach at a big-time college. I lost touch with James because my parents also got divorced, and I moved away. That coach ended up putting James in a program that included weightlifting and drills, and James became the best running back and linebacker his high school had ever seen. He continued to excel, becoming the most successful linebacker in his Division I college's history. They had one of the best defenses in the country. After that, he went pro. James went straight to the top after the incident with his dad. He was a good kid and truly deserved everything he achieved. It's incredible how a negative event like that turned into a pivotal moment that set James on a path to success in football. Story 2. I accidentally dropped my phone from my bed to the floor, and the screen, even with a protector, shattered completely. This was strange because I've dropped my phone from higher places and at worse angles before, and usually, there were just dents in the protector. Anyway, I was left without a phone and was really broke, unable to afford the repairs right away. None of my friends had an extra phone I could borrow, so I posted on my then company's Slack channel, asking if anyone had a spare phone I could use, just for calls and texts. Nothing fancy. I was also going through a terrible heartbreak, having been loved too much and then suddenly dropped by someone. It was a really awful time for me. One person responded to my message and offered me an extra phone he had. I had no idea who he was or what he did at the company, even though I had several friends there. We had never met because we both worked remotely, and no one had ever mentioned him to me. Our departments were so different that we had never interacted. I was a bit confused as to why he would offer a phone to someone he didn't even know. I thought he was just too trusting. They sent the phone to me through a courier, and I ended up needing it for longer than I expected as I saved up for my own phone. We finally met in person a few months later. To make a long story short, it's been a couple of years, and he has become my best friend and then my significant other. For the first time in my life, I know what healthy, unconditional love is. He's the embodiment of love that just keeps giving. I grew up witnessing a bad marriage, so my idea of love and relationships was completely wrong, and I'm still learning. But with him, my heart is calm. He's my biggest supporter and my rock when things get tough. There's no one like him. I don't know anyone as generous in love as he is. I remember that time when I felt absolutely devastated because not only had my heart been shattered in the most miserable way, but my phone also broke from such a short fall, all within a week. I felt so unlucky for the longest time. But looking back now, I'm so incredibly glad my phone broke that day and that my then boyfriend ghosted me. Otherwise, there's no way I would have ever met the love of my life. Story 3. When I was in college, I worked as a personal trainer at a gym. I didn't like the job, but I'd put in a lot of effort to be taken seriously. One day, a gym member who wasn't one of my clients came up to me and asked, hey, can you type? I joked and said, I can type 100 words per minute in a computer, a little slower on an old typewriter. He gave me his business card and told me to call him later. It turned out he was a lawyer. He had heard me talking to my clients over the past year, explaining different things to them. He also knew I didn't like my job, but he didn't know why I felt that way. I called him, and he explained that his secretary had to leave because of a long-term family issue. She had suggested to him that there was a girl at the gym with legal experience, a blonde, who might be able to temporarily fill in or even replace her. The problem was, I was just a blonde with no legal experience at all. I tried to figure out how to tell him this, but he was talking so fast and he asked me to come to his office on Thursday, which was my day off. When I got there, he wanted me to start answering phones right away. I was really bad at it. I could only manage to say law offices before I got too intimidated to continue. At the end of the day, I told him, I think you were supposed to talk to one of the other blonde trainers at the gym, not me. I can't do this. I'm sorry I wasted your time. He laughed and said I was being too hard on myself. I still said no, but we shook hands and I left. A week later, he saw me at the gym again and told me that this old assistant had met a different blonde at a different gym location. He had interviewed her, but there was no way he would hire her. He asked me if I would come in on my days off for the next few weeks to keep trying. He said he would pay me well, and if I didn't want to continue after that, he would understand. That man and that mistake started a career that lasted for many years. I started as a secretary and then became a paralegal. I worked for him for about 3 years, and he told me that one day, my skills would be too much for him to pay for and I would have to move on. He promised he wouldn't hold me back when that time came. He was right. 2 years later, I was hired by a mid-level firm, then poached by a better firm, and then by one of the better firms in our area. I stayed at that firm until I had to choose between moving to a big city in another state for more money or staying and marrying my boyfriend at the time. I chose love, whether that was wise or not. But that accident changed my life from one of insecurity and struggle where I was told I wouldn't amount to anything, to a life where I learned I could succeed and that I had value, talent, and skill. I've never forgotten him or his former assistant, who has since passed away, and I'm forever grateful for their mistake. Wow, that was amazing. Dude found the correct person and hated it and came back and said, "You're the one I want." And then he had the kindness to say, "You're getting too good for me. Someday you'll leave and I won't stop you." That's the boss of all bosses. Story 4. When I was young, my mother had passed away from cancer 3 years earlier, so I was living with my father, who was used to bad habits. We moved around a lot. I changed schools so many times I couldn't even count them. The last place we lived was in an apartment above a garage in a really bad town, which we rented from an old lady. Since I didn't have anyone watching over me, I did whatever I wanted. I would stay out until the early morning, riding my bike and hanging out with friends in some very dangerous parts of town. I often stole things from stores. I didn't care about anything. My living situation was terrible. We had no food, my clothes didn't fit me because we had no money to buy new ones. I was failing all my classes at school and was really behind. I would show up to class whenever I felt like it, or sometimes not at all. My morning routine for school was to wake up whenever I wanted, ride my bike across town, and stop at a grocery store to eat food from the bakery without paying for it. My dad was completely miserable and owed money to everyone, even local dealers who would come to our place at all hours of the day and night. They would bang on the door, screaming for my dad, and I would have to tell them he was at work or out doing something. At that time, I didn't have any family I could rely on, except for my older brother, who didn't know about my living conditions. One morning, I woke up early for school, which was unusual for me, but I had forgotten to move my clothes to the dryer. I put them in the dryer and went back to sleep. I woke up around 10 a.m. and was about to go to school when I decided to leave through the front door instead of the back door, which I usually used. I never used the front door because I was worried that a dealer might be there looking for my dad. For some reason, I decided to use the front door that day. When I opened it, there was a local sheriff with 2 other guys. I thought they were there because I wasn't going to school, but they were actually there to serve an eviction notice. My dad had threatened the lady and hadn't paid the rent. The sheriff asked for my dad and if she could come inside, and I said yes. She saw the state of our house and how I looked, and asked if there was a way to get in touch with my dad or a family member. The first person I thought of was my older brother, and he was there in half an hour after talking to the cop on the phone. He showed up, and after seeing where I lived for the first time, he took one look at me and said, "Get your stuff and put it in my truck. You're not staying with your dad anymore." I felt so incredibly happy when he said that, and I moved my things out of that house so quickly. I went from having a U-Haul full of stuff to just 2 small cardboard boxes of belongings. I stayed with them for a few months until my mom's sister was contacted and took custody of me. She did so much to change the direction of my life. She put me in therapy, gave me a safe and normal home, and helped guide me through my teenage years into adulthood. Now I'm married with a wife and a child. I have a stable 6-figure income, live overseas, and I'm very happy. It's great not to be so poor and wanting things. And it's even better that my own child doesn't have to go through what I did when I was growing up. Story 5. I don't know if this qualifies as an accident, but maybe a happy coincidence. The summer after my freshman year of college, it was 2013, I had spent the year in a horrible relationship. My friends decided to try help me get my mind off of him during an off period and took me to an acquaintance's house for a last-minute party. A friend of mine started dating a new guy and he had brought his friends. I didn't really want to go, but reluctantly tagged along. I hit it off with one of the new guy's friends. We spent the entire night talking and laughing. Little did I know, that night, that same guy I hit it off with wasn't actually planning to attend the party, but made a wrong turn on the way to his intended destination. He saw his friend's car in the driveway and decided to stop by. We just celebrated 10 years together, and 6 years of marriage. He's truly my best friend and has shown me what love is supposed to be like. We have a beautiful little boy, and I'm so thankful we both accidentally ended up at that party. As for the terrible ex I had, he actually called me that night while I was talking to my now husband, presumably to try to fix things, and manipulated me as he had so many times before. I am so glad I didn't answer the call. And after spending the whole night talking and laughing with my now husband, I found the strength to block my ex's number, and I never looked back. Story 6. After I finished grad school, I kind of just bummed around for a couple of years. I was a bartender at a popular college bar in town, so I was living the life. During that time, I got very into a bad habit. As time passed, those habits got too much and ended up in the hospital. Following Monday, I woke up and had difficulty breathing. I went to the local urgent care where they diagnosed me with bronchitis. At the end of the exam, the nurse asked me if there was anything else bothering me, to which I jokingly replied, "My shoulders are a little sore, but I think I just need a new mattress." Her face went dead serious, and she asked me to hold on a second. 2 hospitals, 2 EKGs, and an ambulance ride later, I'm in a hospital 3 cities over. Turns out my bad habits through the years had given me heart ischemia. The doctor did several more tests and an ECG and told me I would be fine, but that I couldn't touch those again and should consider seeking help for my problem. Laying there in that hospital bed was eye-opening. I was young and had just had a medical emergency. I started to take life a bit more seriously and began looking for new job opportunities. About a year later, I decided to leave all the bad juju in that town behind and joined a friend of mine from high school in a new business venture as the company's first programmer and unofficial co-founder, moving to the other side of the state in the process. We made it about 3 years with a small level of success, but eventually things got so bad between the two of us we couldn't be in the same room. I left that company and ended up bartending for a local small chain restaurant. I had a lot of problems with the general manager, some caused by me, some caused by him. It wasn't a great relationship, but I stuck it out because the money was good. Little did I realize that I was slipping back into old habits and restarted again. My relationships with my friends were very shallow and mainly revolved around those with them. During all of this, I had been sharpening my programming skills, starting with making little video games and utility apps to help me manage my day-to-day life, finally settling on making websites here and there. One day I noticed a message had come through our restaurant scheduling app saying a corporation was hiring a web developer. I ignored it at the time, as I was decidedly stupid and still in my hustle and grind entrepreneur phase of life. Fast forward about 6 months later. I was at work and had a particularly bad night with my boss. I was angry and ready to walk out mid-shift. The district manager happened to be in the store that day. I angrily stomped over to him and asked him if the web developer position was still open. He gave me a name and an email address, and I got an interview. I was so desperate to get out of that store that I decided to quit all the bad habits just in case the job required some kind of testing. I had one last session with my buddies from the store, then flushed about $300 worth of stuff down the toilet just so I wouldn't be tempted. I completely failed my first Zoom interview, but managed to get a second in-person interview at the corporate office. I drove my rusted beater an hour to the next town over, parked in the back of the parking lot so nobody would see my horrible car, and walked through the front door into the second interview. I was about 30 minutes into my drive home when a number from the town I had just interviewed in popped up on my phone. Fast forward 2.5 years. I'm now in a job I love. I get along great with my coworkers, my bosses are fantastic, and recognize my skills and hard work. I'm moving up rapidly in the company. I know it's a controversial topic these days, but my coworkers are absolutely my family. We all help each other move forward in the world. I have rebuilt my friend circle and I'm overcoming some issues I've been dealing with since my failed business venture. Been free for 2.5 years and have absolutely no desire to start again. If I hadn't made that dumb joke, I would have gone home with some useless medicines, continued my habits in dirty bathrooms, and seen myself straight to an early grave. I used to be ashamed of the person I was, but if it weren't for him, I wouldn't be the person I am today. Never give up, my friends. Sometimes the change you need in life is right around the bend, and all you gotta do to get there is turn that corner. Story 7. It was the summer of 1995, and I was traveling with my dad and sister across Europe to visit our family in the place where my dad grew up. We went to many different places on our trip. We were leaving Amsterdam and were going to take an overnight bus to our next destination. As we got ready to get on the bus, our friend told us that we should hurry to get the best seats at the back of the bus. They thought these seats would be the most comfortable for sleeping, which was important for a small family with kids. But we didn't get there early enough, and there were only 2 open seats left in the back row when we needed 3. So we had to take seats in the middle of the bus because we wanted to sit together. Later in the middle of the night, I remember waking up and seeing that the bus had stopped. I looked around and saw my dad get up and walk to the front of the bus to see what was happening. We were stopped on the side of the highway, but part of the bus was still in the lane because it was so big and wide. A few moments later, there was a very loud hissing noise. It was a sound of tires on wet pavement. Then there was a huge impact and loud noises. The bus rolled over on its side. When we finally stopped, I looked for my sister and we found each other right away. We were hurt, but we were okay. We couldn't find my dad. We started to panic a little, so we quickly started making our way to the front of the bus where the exit was. We passed many people who were injured. It was a mess of seats that had come loose. I finally saw my dad near the front of the bus, and I felt a huge wave of relief. We hugged and walked out of the bus to see a scene of chaos outside. Turns out a semi-truck had gone into us from behind, the German Autobahn. If I remember correctly, there were 3 people who passed away, and they were all at the very back of the bus. Many people who were sitting near the rear had injuries. As you can imagine, I'm very glad that we didn't get to the bus station earlier that day. Story 8. I did something that helped a girl in high school without even realizing it. And years later, the guy who was bothering her showed up at a party and turned me, a really shy person, into a social superstar. This changed my life in a big way, not just by helping me become more outgoing, but by actually changing the direction of my whole life. Let me tell you more about it. My family lived in a very religious part of the country, and when I got to college, I was completely lost. During my first year, I was invited to my first party by a girl with colorful hair who was so fun and social that it felt really awkward. I couldn't just follow her around, but I didn't know anyone else there. Anyway, I was in the kitchen making a drink while my friend was talking to people when I heard someone say my name. Mikey? I turned around, but I didn't recognize anyone in the room. This wasn't good. Mikey! The guy said it louder this time, and a few people turned to look. This was really not good. Mike! He yelled it out, and the room went quiet. Oh no. I can't believe this. It's really Mike. It felt like the walls of the apartment became see-through because I could feel everyone's eyes on me. I didn't say anything. I just kept looking at the guy with a confused expression. You don't even know who I am, do you? I shook my head. At that moment, I wasn't even sure who I was. Do you remember being on the beach when a guy with a basketball shirt over his head ran up to you, took it off, and gave you something before running away? That was me, he said, looking really proud. I hated you so much. I did remember that. How could I forget? It was the most aggressive and confusing thing that had ever happened to me. I never knew who that guy was or why it happened at a Christmas summer camp. But not now. I love you, dude. He yelled as he turned to talk to everyone in the room. Let me tell you about Mike. This guy was the biggest player on the beach. Every time I'd be talking to these girls, he'd walk by and they'd go all to him. Every single time. I didn't remember girls ever being interested in me. That would have been more memorable than the guy who gave me something while wearing a basketball shirt. It occurred to me that the few times I talked to attractive girls that week was probably because they needed to get away from someone and I seemed safe. This guy spent the next 10 minutes loudly and intoxicatedly praising me. He wanted my phone number so we could hang out, and he made sure everyone at the party knew that I was the coolest person they'd ever met. That party is where I became known as Mikey Mike. It became a nickname that followed me all through college and was yelled across campus almost every day of my freshman year. The important thing is that I was still really shy that whole year. But instead of people thinking I was just shy, they thought I was mysteriously awesome and humble. That's when the rumor started because people were trying to figure me out. They said I drank an entire party ball by myself and never got hammered. I was a secret millionaire. I owned a Maserati. I was arrested in my Maserati filled with girls. I was a great musician that no one had heard of. I sold WhatsApp for billions. I was a famous stealer. That rumor actually got me investigated by the DEA. No joke. And most importantly, I was known for my conquests. These rumors are what really changed my life. I became so well known that I couldn't get a date with the kind of girls I liked because they thought it was too much. But the rumors opened social doors that led to amazing experiences I never would have imagined growing up in a religious area. So, wherever you are, you weird, loud basketball-wearing guy, thank you. I'm still shy, but no one will ever believe that because you changed everything. Damn, I wish this would happen to me sometime. But yeah, anyways, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 9. After I finished my MBA, I wanted to thank the professor who had supervised my major project by taking him out to dinner. This was a few months after graduation, so it wasn't about any hidden agendas or anything like that. He was busy helping a student. So while I was waiting, I started reading the job listings on the bulletin board because I'm a compulsive reader. I saw a listing for a biotechnology analyst at a company I had never heard of before. I didn't know what a biotech analyst did. We were always told to practice interviewing, so I wrote down the details and sent him a resume. Even though I had a degree in biology, I was working as an electronics designer, so I made sure to highlight that part of my career. I thought that whatever a biotech analyst did, they might want someone with a technical background. I got an interview, and the lady explained the job to me. It sounded like I would be studying companies and writing reports about them, which seemed interesting. However, the pay was much less than what I was earning as a designer, but there was a chance for a bonus after 3 months, which was different from the tech industry, where bonuses were usually small and only came once a year. I talked it over with my wife and decided it could be a good way to move away from tech, so I took the job. I figured I could make up the difference in pay by doing freelance design work on the side. 3 months later, I was at my desk, struggling to get a financial model to balance when my boss came over and handed me a folded piece of paper. It had a number written on it. If I remember correctly, it was $12,000. I didn't understand what $12,000 meant in that context, so I asked her and she said, "That's your monthly bonus." I almost fainted. That night I practically danced my way home, and that's how I ended up having a successful career in capital markets and making a lot of money. It all started because I compulsively read the job listings on a school bulletin board. Story 10. In summer of 2016, I was at the lowest point in my life. I just finished my sophomore year of college as a bio major or pre-med student, but this school year just wasn't it. I failed a few classes, barely passed the rest, and for some reason, I thought I was a good student who could make up for lost time by doing some summer courses. In reality, I should have withdrawn from those summer courses and stayed home because I was so unmotivated in my studies that I wanted to drop out of college. I was so unmotivated that I was too lazy to even go through the dropout process. Well, I ended up going with the flow and moved into my apartment for the summer class sessions. I lived with 5 other people. One other guy, the rest girls. One of those girls ended up being the most important person in my life. I met her at my lowest point where I didn't know how to smile anymore, how to laugh anymore, how to enjoy life anymore. But being around her changed that. Here she was in the same boat as me, basically, but she was still so expressive, exuberant, and full of life. Her being the way she is showed me that even in the worst situations, you can still find joy in life. We lived together for 11 weeks. All these years later, these are still some of the best weeks of my life, just because I got to be around her. She ended up saving my life, because I decided to take summer classes I had no ability to actually do and wound up in the apartment that I did because I asked a friend at the right time. I can find happiness no matter the situation. Story 11. Left a job that had taken over my life. Hadn't spent a holiday with my wife in 6 years, worked the majority of weekends, traveled constantly and had moved twice for it. Shortly after leaving, I had dinner with a friend and his wife, who also worked at the company. They lived in a different state but had flown in to help work. When talking about what I was going to do next, I told them I had no idea. But my wife and I are discussing leaving the state because we didn't like it. In the midst of telling them where we would want to move and a couple companies I had applied to, my friend's wife said her brother actually worked at one of the companies. After getting in touch with her brother, he was able to get my resume past the digital screening to an actual HR, which led to multiple interviews and eventually a job offer. My wife and I now live in our dream state, working in the industry I originally wanted to do right out of college and absolutely living our best lives. Story 12. In 1984, I was a junior in college and had to do an internship somewhere for my degree in psychology. I had no idea what I wanted to do for a career. I had started college as a business major and then drifted into psychology because it was more interesting. My college had a compound mimeographed book of places that would take interns, so I started calling phone numbers in the A's and got turned down by a few. There was a place in the B's that said they helped adults with cognitive disabilities. I called and got an interview for my internship. I showed up for my interview wearing my polyester tie, polyester sport coat, and my best shoes. When I walked and asked for the person who had arranged my interview, the first person I saw said, "Oh, she's out running an errand. You must be the new intern. Come here and help me lift this guy out of his wheelchair." Turns out that although I had never been around or worked with people with disabilities, I liked it, and I was good at it. The next decade, I took a lot of training and got a master's degree and became very good at teaching others how to help people with disabilities. I've spent the last 35 years training more than 20,000 people who provided adult and school services to people with cognitive differences and or behavioral problems. And it's been a great career, all because no one in the A's wanted an intern. One more really nice thing. I'm sometimes asked to talk to high school students in a career or psychology class about autism. Inevitably, some kid will ask, "How did you become an autism or behavior specialist?" And I say, "Look, in high school I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I see about 25% of the kids just let out a big breath of my future stress. And when I talk about the above wandering into a career, I see even more kids relax." Story 13. Met my now husband on an anonymous chat app. Fun part is, it was not me using the app, but my friend who used it to talk to foreigners. I was sitting with her and chatting when she got a message saying hi and stating his name. She didn't want to reply back, but I thought of a funny word pun which went with his name and asked her to text that in return. She was like, "Why don't you do it?" So I did, and we wound up texting for 3 hours straight that day. After that, I obviously gave her phone back and didn't think anything about it when exactly 1 year later, I installed the app myself, and lo and behold, I connected with nobody but the same guy. This time we talked for a week and then he disconnected the app. This happened again, where we would talk for a few days, a month at max, and then delete the app. The last time he gave me his number to text for, which I again didn't bother. Months passed, and I found myself thinking of him every day. I finally got better of myself and decided to text him New Year wishes. In truth, I missed talking to him so much, and this seemed like a safe excuse to talk. This was in 2018, and since that, no day has passed when we didn't talk to each other. We soon decided to meet up, and my life has been a fairy tale ever since. What's amazing is that it was a Sunday, the first time I talked to him, and if it was any other day, I wouldn't be sitting with my friend like that. My convent college had strict rules. It was that particular Sunday when he decided to install the app at the telling of his friend, and how amazing it was that we were at the same time at the same place and always managed to connect with each other. Story 14. I was standing in the water filter aisle at Walmart when I started a conversation with the lady next to me. I've been unemployed for a few months after moving with my wife so that she could go to grad school. I mentioned that I was out of work, and she more or less offered me a job after finding out my background. I didn't feel qualified for what she was talking about, so I declined. She gave me the name of a local company that provided a lot of health services in the area. I had a psych degree but wanted to teach. I applied for a job teaching at an alternative high school, but it turned out that I wasn't qualified. Master's, but no teaching certificate. The boss lady called me back and said that she couldn't give me that job, but said that I interviewed so well that she wanted to hire me. She asked if I was interested in working with adolescents who had severe emotional issues. I said, "I'll have to think about that and call you back." My interest in psychology was in teaching about the nature of being a person, but I hadn't intended to be a counselor. In the end, I was poor, bored, and I did like helping people. I called back 5 minutes later and said I was sorry that I had asked more questions. So, I spent 2 years as a counselor and a teacher. As a kid from Wyoming, I counseled group members from cities. I watched kids go through withdrawal. I sat in the emergency room with a girl who apologized for ruining my night by attempting to end it. I learned so much about psychology and the nature of being a person, but even more about the nature of my own privilege. Story 15. Getting my Class A commercial driver's license. Basically tried the majority of work that an individual can get into with a GED. Randomly searched the internet for truck driver jobs out of curiosity. Top of the list was a small form to fill out. A recruiter called me within 5 minutes. They set me up with a bus ticket to the training facility 2 states over and lodging for the duration. All I had to do was bring enough cash and clothes for a week. They paid enough to feed me for the rest of the training. I had an over-the-road job lined up for me right out of training. All I had to do was stick it out with that company for at least a year to cover training costs, and then I had an entry into a skilled labor field at a near no upfront cost, and a guaranteed minimum 1 year of incredibly valuable experience. This was back in 2008, and for what it's worth, I didn't even own my own vehicle yet back then, and I only tried manual transmission vehicles twice for maybe 10 minutes total prior to learning how to drive at 10-speed. Now I can simply email or walk into a job that interests me with my resume, and my experience speaks for itself. I don't have to sell myself to an employer. I have to sell the job to me. Currently about to start up with a local company less than a 5-minute drive from home, hauling mostly oversized loads up into and out of the mountains. It's the highest starting wage I've ever had, with a guaranteed multiple dollars an hour raise once I demonstrate I can do everything they'll need me to do. Moral of the story, don't be afraid to try something new or different. You might just be great at it. Story 16. Working in a large state park as a guide while finishing up my geology degree, was only interested in science, talking about rock types and tectonics and whatnot. One day it got cold and windy fast, and snow started coming down and soaking my clothes. I admittedly was not prepared and ducked into a cabin I came across that I thought would be empty. It wasn't. There was a historical interpreter doing traditional chair seat weaving in the cabin. He said, "Take your shoes off and stay a while." Let's just say multiple years later, I own one of the most respected furniture restoration businesses in the state and specialize in antique Appalachian rockers. Visit the old man in the nursing home weekly. I go out to the cabin once a month or so to relax and demonstrate to passersby. Took my shoes off and stayed a while. P.S. Geology is still cool. Story 17. I was solo traveling to Peru at the end of 2019 and spent a week in Cusco doing a trek and visiting Machu Picchu. At the end of the trip, I had a 6-hour layover in Lima where a guy who I was practicing Spanish with met me at the airport so we could hang out in person. We really hit it off and knew we wanted to be more than friends, but circumstances, like living in 2 different countries, didn't make it possible. As I was getting ready to board my next flight to Mexico, security asked where my entrance stamp to Peru was. I said it's in my passport, of course, but it wasn't. I didn't have an entrance stamp into the country. Therefore, I couldn't leave the country. So I called my Spanish practicing partner and told him the situation. He came back to the airport and we ended up spending 4 more days together because it was Friday and the immigration office was open Monday for me to get my stamp. And then I was rescheduled to fly out Tuesday. It was an amazing 4 days. Long story short, we're now married almost 4 years later. Story 18. My story is all based on lunch at Taco Bell. One day in a state college, I went to lunch by chance at a Taco Bell I'd never been to. Bumped into my teacher and as he was leaving, mentioned that he would like to talk if I had the chance. I grabbed my tacos and sat with him. After a long conversation, he encouraged me to change colleges and go to a private school that would really challenge me and give me the education he felt I deserved. I did and graduated with knowledge and skill I would have never gotten at the original school. Trying to keep this short, I met my wife while in the city for my first job that I would have never gotten if not for this school. I have 2 girls that, again, would not exist if not for this lunch. My sister married one of my best friends while in the dorm at the school I went to, and they have a kid, my nephew, and my brother married a girl who was a year younger in my class. The amount of lives in existence thanks to a random lunch at Taco Bell is mind-blowing. Story 19. In April of this year, our 3rd child started losing all of his abilities, like walking, crawling, and even sitting up on his own. This happened over a few weeks, and he was diagnosed with a rare and genetic disease called crab disease. My wife and I had no idea that either of us could be carriers of this disease, and our 2 older children do not have it. This diagnosis completely surprised us. South Carolina, where we live, do not test for crab disease when our son was born. In fact, 39 other states in the U.S. also don't test for it, so the disease wasn't caught through a newborn screening. If it had been caught early, a stem cell transplant could have allowed our son to live a fairly normal life for many years before the disease progressed. It's very unusual for children who already show symptoms to be eligible for a transplant, but our son was in a rare situation where he might still benefit. We traveled 10 hours from our home to Pittsburgh for this chance at a transplant. The doctors told us that after the transplant, our son would probably lose all movement. Without the transplant, they said he would likely pass away by the end of the year. We had just 24 hours to make this life-changing decision. We've been in Pittsburgh for 5 months now, away from our work and our 2 daughters and the rest of our family. Our son went through the transplant and it was successful. He's recovering well and has surprised everyone by being able to move his arms and legs and hold his head up fairly well. Has defied all the odds. We're hoping that he can be part of a clinical trial that is currently looking for a cure through gene therapy. The transplant is just a temporary solution to extend his life, but we're looking for a real cure. Our son has a page where we share updates and try to raise awareness about crab disease. It's called Prayers for Arthur, Hope for a Cure. He's such a sweet boy, and we will do everything we can to keep him with us, hoping that a cure will be found. We want to spread awareness and share the information that we didn't have. No family should have to go through what we are experiencing. We are determined to help our son and to help others understand the importance of early detection in the search for a cure for crab disease and other similar conditions. Story 20. Went to a party in November 2017 for a friend of mine, expecting or wanting to see my ex there. I did see him, and we did talk, but the friend whose party I went to was the one I actually ended up with. We had barely spoken before that, but he actually approached me first, totally innocently, thanking me for coming to his party, and we made plans for 2018 New Year's with friends. From then, we talked daily, sometimes for 10+ hours. I showed up late at 2 a.m. New Year's Day after work held me back, and he was waiting for me after everyone else but one friend left. He did know I'd be late, though. We kissed that night, and though we're not together anymore, we had a great 2.5-year relationship, and we now have a beautiful 2-year-old child. Though we didn't work out as lovers, I can confidently say he's a great father and still one of my best friends. Story 21. After I got out of the military, I went to law school and became an attorney that practiced in a fairly niche area of the law. While the money was really good as a practicing attorney, the hours in the firm life was making me really unhappy. I had a feeling I wanted to go back to the federal government, so I went on USA Jobs to see if there were any postings for government attorney jobs in my area of specialization. I stumbled across a posting from a large 3-letter agency for special agents conducting criminal investigations in an area adjacent to my field of legal practice. I randomly applied and got the job. It has changed everything in my life for the better, and I'm so unbelievably grateful I randomly happened across it. I was nervous about making a sudden, unplanned career change in such a whim, but I'm so happy I did. Every aspect of my life has improved. What was your, holy cow, this is actually happening moment? When I first got my own apartment, I received the keys 3 days before the move-in date, so I went there straight from the office. It was completely empty and just looked so clean with fresh paint and new carpet. And then I heard what I haven't heard in a long time. The complete silence. After a while, I noticed that I was actually grinning and started visualizing where everything would go, what I'd need to buy and what I should throw away, alternative configurations and options, and it was great. It got late and I ended up sleeping in the bedroom on the carpet with only my coat as a blanket, but I was so happy. The chance at a new beginning is a beautiful thing. Personal space and the ability to have quiet to oneself can do a lot of good for a person. Story 2. For 19 years, I was a fat kid. Then I finally lost weight, not in super good shape, but enough to run a half marathon when I was around 21. My weight went up and down for several years before I decided I needed to take my life seriously and really get healthy. The other day, I ran a 5-mile road race with a friend. This friend is in great shape and has been his whole life. I knew that if I could get past him, I could really call myself in great shape. We started the race and he took off ahead of me. I just couldn't keep up, and I remember thinking, this is bad. I really thought I could keep up with him. But he stayed in my view, and after 1.5 miles, I noticed he was closer. At 2.5 miles, I caught up to him. By 4 miles, I knew I had enough energy left to pass him. That moment when I thought, oh my god, I'm an actual athlete, felt so incredibly good. That's because the feeling of being a fat kid never really goes away. A few days after the race, I told a girl that I really liked her, but she didn't say much at the time. She didn't shut me out or lead me on, so I felt a bit lost. A few weeks later, I asked her if she wanted to go get coffee together. That afternoon coffee turned into us talking under the moonlight for hours. It was surreal and incredibly beautiful. She had a feeling that I liked her for a while, but it only became real for her. It became her this is really happening moment after I told her how I felt and how serious I was about her. She needed time to think about whether or not she was ready for a relationship, and luckily, by the time I asked her for coffee, she had an answer. Story 3. At the beginning of 2016, around New Year's, my family and I were driving back from my grandparents' house at night. It was raining and there was fog. We went around a corner and I felt the car start to skid. But my dad has always been a great driver, so I thought, he'll turn it back, no problem. Then we started rolling, and I realized, oh my gosh, this is really happening. I remember shouting a lot of, no ways. It was like a scene from a movie, with the camera spinning and glass everywhere. I was listening to Lana Del Rey at the time. The next thing I knew, I was scrambling out of the car. I saw the door starting to smoke and thought the car might catch on fire, so I quickly jumped out with my little brother under my arm. Thankfully, we were all okay, but it was terrifying. It turned out we had skidded and went to a lamppost. Another time, at a music festival, I met a guy named Justin who had a really relaxed vibe. My girlfriend and I were dancing near his group for a while and we shared some stuff. I asked him, "Hey Justin, has anyone ever told you that you look exactly like Shia LaBeouf?" Without missing a beat, he said, "That's my name. My name is Shia LaBeouf. My publicist doesn't want people seeing me here doing all this stuff." For the next 4 hours, we hung out with him and his friends, and it was the most magical experience of my life. I added him on Snapchat, and the next day, I realized it was actually just some rich kid named Justin who looked and sounded like Shia LaBeouf. Story 4. When I had my first college hookup with someone I really liked. She was very attractive. She was a senior and I was just a sophomore. I started talking to her on a Wednesday, and by Saturday, we were in bed together. It was Halloween weekend and we were both very hammered, which made my confidence really high that night. I was wearing a Punisher costume that I made for Halloween, and I was proud of the muscle I had built. I had used the line, "I'm something stupid, do me," when she said she wanted to do something stupid that night, and it worked. Here's some background. I weighed 220 pounds at the end of my second semester of college because I'd gained 30 pounds, but I lost all the fat and gained muscle in about 2.5 months. For once, I felt confident and proud of my body. That moment is one I'll never forget. Even though things didn't work out with her, I was very proud of the person I'd become. 6 months before that, I was afraid to talk to my own shadow. I was very overweight and had a lot of issues. Now I'm confident, close to having the body I want, less sad, and I've worked through many of my issues. Just remember, nerds, that we can get the girl. It might take some time, but we do, eventually. Story 5. I was sitting in the front row at a WWE event, and the bad guy champion came up right to me, yelled in my face, and insulted me. When I saw this huge guy climb out of the ring, making eye contact and coming straight for me, I thought, holy cow, this is really happening. It was scary. I'll tell you more about this because people seem really interested. It was Kevin Owens. The main event was a match between Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, and I was dressed like Sami because I usually dress like him anyway. Kevin called my group freaking losers early in the match, made fun of Sami Zayn's dancing, and made a rude gesture at my brother. Then at the end, he held up the championship belt and said to me, "You'll never have what I have. Enjoy being a loser forever." Story 6. One morning I was walking down the street. It was very dark and with not many streetlights on. It was about 1:30 a.m. and extremely foggy. Overall, it wasn't a very comfortable night to be out walking. I was about 5 minutes away from where I was going when I could barely see a person walking towards me in a rather confrontational way. I'd like to say I wasn't scared, but I was. I thought, oh no, this is really happening. I'm going to be close enough for this guy to reach me in just a few hundred feet. I was going to cross the street to see if it was actually coming after me, but I decided to stay where I was and see what would happen. As we got within about 15 feet of each other, I decided to say something. I yelled, "Hello." He said hello back and kept going wherever he was going. In the end, I was very happy that I said hi to him. Another time when I was a young and silly kid, I used to play pranks on my sister. We kept the cat food on top of the refrigerator. Since I was small, I would climb onto the counter and stand on it to reach the cat food. One day, my sister was supposed to be watching me, but she was on the phone with her friend. For some reason, I decided to climb on top of the fridge instead of just reaching for the cat food. I managed to get up there and was on my hands and knees. When I tried to crawl forward with my right hand, the freezer door opened and I fell inside. As I was falling, I remember thinking, wow, I'm really falling right now. I landed on the floor and it got all the wind out of me. My sister was panicking because I could barely breathe at first. She thought she'd be in trouble for almost letting me hurt myself as a child. Story 7. I teach a special kind of yoga that uses the wall, which has special equipment and props to do different poses. It's really fun, very popular, and also very dangerous. If someone thinks they know more than I do, we're going to have a problem. I had a student who bragged about how much he weighed. He proudly said that he weighed 420 pounds that night. This was the first warning sign. He brought a friend to show off how agile he was for someone who was quite heavy. This was the second warning sign. He was taking a yoga teacher training course, which was a huge red flag. We were about to do a different kind of headstand where you hang upside down by just your wrists. I asked this guy to please not do this one. He didn't like that. He said he knew his body better than I did, that he was getting better training than I was, and that he thought he was strong enough. What happened next felt like it took both a long time and no time at all. He got his feet over his head. I quickly moved forward thinking I might be able to catch him. I wasn't fast enough, and he landed on his head with his belly and lower body on me. It took 5 other students to help me get out from under him. Surprisingly, he wasn't hurt. I was just winded and had a few bruises, but I was okay. And I banned him from my class. Story 8. I was working as event security, and I got a call to check out people arguing in the stands. The guy I was patrolling with and I went there. It was a man with his wife or girlfriend. We took them out of their seats and into the walkway area to find out what was going on. Then the man suddenly hurt the woman. He yelled it was all her fault and he just wanted to watch the game and he blamed her for what he had done. That was the first, "holy cow, this is really happening" moment. We put the man in zip ties. He followed us the whole way down to the security station while the woman followed quietly, crying a little but not saying much. We radioed ahead for the police to meet us there because it was a crime. When we got to the guard station, we explained everything to the cops. They took the guy out of the zip ties and started questioning him. Then they acted like they were going to let him go. The police were basically about to say it was a crime he said, she said situation and let him walk away. At the same time, the guy I was patrolling with and I started the citizen's arrest speech. This was the second, "holy cow, this is really happening" moment. Now about citizen's arrests. Depending on your state, it doesn't mean much more than the police have to at least take the person away from you. They don't have to charge them or arrest them, but they at least have to take control and document it. The year before, we had a lot of fights at the stadium with repeat offenders, and the chief of police made it clear that if we guards placed someone under citizen's arrest, he expected his officers to book them and let the district attorney decide if they would prosecute. He expected a 1-to-1 ratio in our reports to their arrest reports in those situations. We basically forced their hand. I have no idea if that guy ended up in trial, but he at least left in handcuffs that night. So she got at least one night to hopefully get away. Story 9. For 3 years, now 4, I was in a long-distance relationship with a guy I met online. We started as friends, became best friends, and then when our feelings grew too strong, we started dating. It was amazing. Even though we hadn't met in person, about 4 months later, he bought a plane ticket and flew to Chicago to see me. I woke up early, did my makeup, and put on a nice dress. I drove to the airport feeling an odd sense of calm, but once I got there, I started to panic. It finally got me that he was coming. I was so nervous, my heart was racing. Luckily, my best friend's boyfriend was there, joking around and recording the whole thing, which helped distract me. But the moment he stepped off the elevator, I ran to him without thinking and jumped into his arms. After 3 years of waiting for that moment, I was finally with him, kissing him and smiling at him. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. I was expecting a catfish tale. Story 10. Meeting the love of my life in person was a big moment for me. A few years ago, I met a girl through my YouTube channel. I sometimes post music there and she found my Facebook page because of it. Most people just friend me to compliment the music and then move on. But she actually wanted to have a conversation with me. We talked every day for a long time and I fell in love with her. The only issue was that she lived in South Africa. I didn't think it would ever work out, but we loved each other. So we decided to try. We saved money for a year so I could travel to South Africa to see her. I stayed there for 3 months, and on the second day, I proposed to her. The day I had to leave was the hardest day of my life. I felt really sad for the next week, but then I knew it was time to get a job and stop being a lazy musician. I needed to bring her here with me. 2 years later, after spending a lot of money, she stepped off the plane and into my arms again. We've been married for a little over a year now, and I've never been happier. She's my everything. She encouraged me to record my first album. And even though it hadn't made me any money, it's a great feeling to have my music online for people to buy if they want to. Story 11. I was born in the early 1990s. I recently realized that I'm living in the future. When I look around, I see super thin TVs that can make you feel like you're actually in the scene. Virtual reality headsets don't just show you a different world. They make your body believe you're really there. Scientists are working on age-reversing medicines, and I know of one that's already being tested in humans. We have cars that can drive themselves or help the driver. Exoskeletons are being used for medical and military purposes. Artificial prosthesis lets amputees walk, pick things up, and even feel again. Laser eye surgery can fix people's vision problems. It's 2024 and 2027 is only 3 years away. 2032 is just 8 years away. When I was a young teenager, those years seemed so far off that they felt almost like they were from a story. Every day we take another step into the future. What do you think it will be like? I've been thinking about keeping a journal and writing down my predictions about the future, and when the time comes, I can compare what really happens to what I thought would happen. Story 12. My 21st birthday was an adventure. I flew back to Australia from England and things didn't go as planned. The day before my birthday, the flight from London to Abu Dhabi was okay, but the flight from Abu Dhabi to Sydney was delayed because a man might have had a medical emergency on the plane. I missed my connecting flight from Sydney to Melbourne, which was the last one before the airport curfew. I had to book the first flight in the morning and only got 3 hours of sleep in a hotel. On my birthday, as we were about to land in Melbourne after a 1-hour flight, the pilot told us we had to go back to Sydney. The fog in Melbourne hadn't cleared and we couldn't land. A 24-hour trip turned into a 37-hour journey. I didn't want to get on another plane after that. My boyfriend bought me a skydiving ticket 2 days later. Story 13. One time I almost got into an accident with an 18-wheeler truck. It was snowing heavily and I wanted to call in sick to work, but my boss had already said he would fire anyone who didn't show up that day, and he didn't like me much. Even though my parents both told me to stay home, I left for work. As I got close to a stop sign and put the brakes way before the sign, I realized my car wasn't stopping. It was sliding onto the highway and I could see an 18-wheeler coming straight at me. I tried really hard to stop the car using the emergency brake and pressing the brake pedal over and over, but the car wouldn't stop. I was wearing a lot of layers because of the cold and I was panicking so much that I couldn't undo my seatbelt to get out. I just watched the truck coming at me, struggling with my seatbelt and feeling my throat tighten as I thought, oh no, this is really happening. That truck is going to go onto me. I'm going to end. By some miracle, my car stopped just in time. The truck zoomed past me, not even a foot away from my car. After it was gone, I gently pressed the gas, drove across the rest of the highway, and pulled over. I cried uncontrollably for the next 20 minutes before I could call work and yell at one of the managers that my life was more important than keeping a low-paying job with a boss who was a narcissistic guy. That is completely uncalled for by that boss. Story 14. I was in a band that did pretty well, but I left to work in my own music. My last big tour was with my all-time favorite band, and they were huge stars. This was the band I grew up listening to. They influenced who I am as a musician. I got to play on the same stage as them every night. On the last night of the tour, we all hung out with the band. It was an amazing time just relaxing with them. At one point, my friend and I stepped outside for a smoke, and he turned to me with the biggest smile. I realized I had the same smile on my face. We spent the rest of the night getting hammered and talking about all sorts of things with our idols. It was one of the greatest moments of my life, something I could only dream of when I was young. Story 15. Getting a job in the game industry wasn't my original goal. I was finishing an associate's degree in fine arts at a community college, heading toward becoming a starving artist. Then I decided to try something different, becoming a game artist. I had nothing to lose except a lot of debt and a degree that might not lead to a job. I found a school with a mentorship program, which gave me a chance to see how I do in the real world. In my final year of school, the mentorship program accepted only 3 applicants out of 35 eligible students. I was one of 7 chosen to interview, and I got in. That was the first hurdle cleared. I started at the company as an intern. The art director made it clear that the interns rarely got hired, but I worked extra hours and made sure my work was the best it could be, using what I'd learned in school. I put more effort into that internship than I had into my senior classes. I wanted to see how I compared to current industry professionals. At the end of my internship, as I was preparing my portfolio for the Game Developers Conference, or GDC, I got called into the art director's office. They offered me a temporary artist position. Of course, I said yes. I wanted the permanent job, but getting my foot in the door was a start. 3 months into my temp job, I was doing basic work like creating props, crates, barrels, tents, but I made sure each thing I made was better than the last, always improving. And something big happened. A producer tapped me on the shoulder on Wednesday, out of nowhere. I knew who she was, but we'd never spoken. My first thought was that I was in trouble and they were going to let me go. She walked me into the art director's office and immediately said, "Don't worry, you're not in trouble. Actually, it's quite the opposite." I'll never forget that moment. They offered me a contract for a full-time salary position. They wanted me to be a permanent part of the team. Coming home that night and telling my mom, hugging her and crying, was the biggest moment of my life. I couldn't believe I'd get to do what I loved for a living. I've been at the company for almost 2.5 years now, and I love every minute of it. It was the best decision I ever made. Story 16. When I was young, I was playing video games in the living room. My dad was a police officer, and he had the day off because it was a holiday. But he got called into work because there was a bad accident in the highway. The police car that went to help got into an accident, and now the interstate was completely stopped. A couple of hours later, a big, friendly man came to our house. He seemed a bit surprised to see me. He asked to talk to my mom. When she came over, the man told her that my dad had been in an accident and was at the hospital. When we got to the hospital, it still really didn't sink in. I thought, this can't happen to my dad, right? I imagined he'd be like Officer McClane, just sitting on the side of the bed with his arm getting his medical attention. I thought, oh, it's just a small accident on the side of a highway. Why don't you come help us clean it up? It'll be fun. We'll have coffee and donuts later. Yum, cop food. But after waiting in the waiting room for half an hour, the doctors let my mom and me see him. When we walked into the room, he was shaken and bruised. He was covered in bandages and he had a swollen eye that was as big as a baseball. His teeth were stained red. He could barely look over at us because he was wearing a neck brace. I couldn't think of anything to say. I just stood there, looking at him. I was in shock, thinking, this can't happen, but it did? Well, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 17. 2 years ago, I found myself in a very dark place. I was 17 floors up, standing at my balcony railing, completely sober, with no clear memory of how I ended up there. My hands were gripping the railing tightly, and a cigarette was between my fingers. I looked down, trying to find a reason not to jump. In the end, the thought of what it would do to my friends stopped me. We had already gone through 2 experiences in the previous 2 months, along with an accident from a car not long before. And then there were my cats. Who would take care of them? The good thing about hitting rock bottom is that the only direction left to go is up. I decided to pull through my challenges and pull myself out of that dark place. It's still a challenge sometimes, but things are better now. A great moment came last September. I got into my friend's car at 6 a.m. on a rainy Saturday. After weeks of planning and booking our stay, our trip was finally happening. We crossed the border into the United States for the first time in almost 15 years. We had a wild night in Portland and then drove south along the coast. It was beautiful, and the sunset was amazing. We stopped in Eureka for the night and then headed to San Francisco. A few days later, more friends joined us, and we made our way back to the coast. We even slept on the side of the highway in the middle of nowhere one night. The next day, we ventured into the Mojave Desert in a sandstorm. After waiting in line for 6 hours, getting blasted by sand the whole time, we made it into the festival. It felt like coming home. 4 days in what felt like a post-apocalyptic wasteland were the best time of my life. I met so many new people, watched my friend compete in gladiator events and saw people battle it out in a full-size Thunderdome. Being Canadian, we brought maple syrup, ketchup-flavored chips, and crow feathers, which people loved. The only bad part was the cold I caught on the way down. I'm planning to go back this year and every year after that. Story 18. In August 2015, I got my first regular job, working from 9 to 5. Before that, I had fallen for a few scams and was feeling pretty desperate. I got a haircut, started wearing glasses again, and even lied on my resume to improve my chances. Eventually, one place offered me a job. The interview was with a blonde, chubby woman and her boss, an old man who looked like he had seen better days. The interview went well. Actually, it was great. I was even making jokes, which I was too scared to do in previous interviews. 2 weeks later, they called me to say I got the job. The job itself was easy. Too easy. Most of the work was done by the blonde woman, and even then, I could have done it much faster. There was tension between the blonde and the old man. Even though I was new and didn't know much, I understood the most important rule of office behavior. Avoid conflicts at all costs. The blonde woman didn't seem to get that. To make a long story short, just 2 weeks into my new job, I watched as the woman who hired me got fired. It happened because she didn't get the right speakers in time and had a big argument with her boss, both online and in person. Story 19. Last Sunday night, around 11:30 p.m., I woke up to some strange noises coming from my living room. There were loud noises and other sounds. At first, I thought it was just my kitten playing around, which she does sometimes, but I decided to check it out anyway. So I grabbed my weapon. With my weapon in one hand and my cell phone's flashlight in the other, I went to the living room. I checked all the doors and windows to make sure everything was okay. My cat was acting a bit weird, but I was tired and just wanted to go back to bed, so I didn't think much of it. When I got back to bed, I couldn't fall asleep. About 15 or 20 minutes later, I heard those noises again. As I sat up in bed, I noticed a light coming from under our bathroom door. There's a window in the bathroom, so I grabbed my weapon and phone again, opened the bathroom door, and walked to the window. I moved the blinds aside and saw a guy trying to pry my window open. I couldn't believe it was happening. It felt like a dream. All I could think about was that my family was right there in the room with me, my wife and her toddler. This guy knew someone was home. He must have seen me walking around with a flashlight earlier when I was checking the house. So there I was, face to face with this guy, not even 2 feet away from me. I pointed my weapon at him and told him to stay where he was. I took out my phone and called 911. While I was on the phone with the dispatcher, the guy ran to the Arcadia sliding glass door and threw a rock at it, a rock as big as a softball. Incredibly, the rock bounced off the door. I calmly told the dispatcher, "There's an attempted break-in happening right now. He's trying to get through my glass door by throwing a rock at it. If it gets in, my family's in the bedroom and I'm afraid for our lives. I will hurt him if he enters my house." I gave the dispatcher my address and they said, "I understand. You need to protect your family. Do what you have to. Officers are on their way and we'll be there in 3 minutes." I left the bathroom, went to the living room, opened the blinds to the sliding glass door and turned on all the outside lights. The guy had already left. The police arrived and walked through the backyard. I met them in the back porch and we looked around the house. The guy who tried to break in had damaged several window screens leading to the master bedroom. The Arcadia sliding door had a big crack in it, and the rock was sitting next to it. I never thought something like this would happen to me, but it did. And I can say for sure that I would have hurt him without hesitation if he had entered my house. The police didn't find the guy, but the very next day I had a security system installed in my home. Now I can sleep a little easier at night. Story 20. I was my sophomore year in high school when I decided to join the theater program because it seemed really fun and exciting. I was part of the freshman class, and there was this girl in the class who I thought was really pretty. I wasn't very confident because I wasn't liked much by the popular group, so I never thought I'd have a chance with her. As time went by, we were paired up for a project, which gave me an excuse to talk to her. We worked well together and got to know each other a bit. I learned that she was a Ukrainian and had moved to the United States when she was young after her mother married someone so they could live here. After we finished the assignment and wanted to talk to her more, but didn't want to seem creepy. After a few months, a new freshman joined our class and we quickly became friends because we had similar personalities. I found out that he was friends with a Ukrainian girl, so now we were hanging out together more often. I finally had the chance to talk to her and get to know her better. The more we talked, the cooler she seemed. Her friend told me that she thought I was cute, but I didn't believe him. However, after that, I noticed her looking at me more often. She became more comfortable around me and shared personal things, like how her past boyfriends were not nice to her and how her stepfather was a creep. I wasn't sure if she liked me romantically or if she just wanted to be best friends. And the first school dance at the end of the first quarter was coming up. I had to make a decision. Ask her out or let the opportunity pass. I decided it was time to be brave and ask her. The night of our homecoming game, I was looking everywhere for her. I asked her friends where she was, but they didn't know. Time was running out. The game was ending with everyone heading to the dance. My heart was racing and I was full of adrenaline. I had so much confidence. For 10 minutes until the dance started, I still couldn't find her. I asked her classmates where she might be. 7 minutes left. Near the bathroom, outside, she was nowhere to be found. With 5 minutes left, I thought if she didn't show up, I'd just go home. I was getting really worried. Then one of her friends told me to turn around. There she was, looking amazing, all dressed up. I think she was hoping I would ask her to the dance. I walked up to her slowly, tapped her shoulder, and when she turned around, I took a deep breath and asked her if she wanted to go to the dance with me, as a couple. It felt like time stopped. Her face lit up with excitement, and she said, very shyly, yes. Story 21. I worked really hard on building my resume, doing volunteer work and becoming a pharmacy technician so I could apply to a physician assistant master's program. It took me 3 years after finishing my undergraduate degree to get everything ready, because I had student loans and bills to deal with. The moment I realized all my hard work was paying off was after I was rejected by the top school in my area. I was actually proud of myself for even getting an interview there. Then I got a call at work offering me the very last spot in another PA program I had applied to and interviewed for. Another big moment was when my genetic counselor called to tell me that I also have Lynch syndrome, which I inherited from my mother. And then there was the time I finally found the courage to break up with my ex-boyfriend after we had been having problems for a while. Just 3 weeks later, I met the love of my life, and we'd been together for 5 amazing years. I knew I loved him the moment we met. We started dating just 10 days later. Story 22. One day on my way home from work, I saw an old man who had collapsed at a bus stop. He looked like he was having a seizure, so I stopped my car to check on him. As I got closer, I saw a lot of red liquid around him, and he was unconscious. I noticed he was wearing a medical alert bracelet that said he took vasodilators. My mother was with me, and she started to panic. I could see the man was having trouble breathing, and I realized he might be fading. That was my holy cow, this is really happening moment. I quickly told my mother to call the police and to keep people away, especially the kids who were starting to come home from school. As I was shouting out information like the time, where we were, and what was happening with the man, I started to use the first aid training I had learned just the week before. I rolled him over to start CPR. He had no pulse, and doing CPR for 10 minutes was really hard for me because I'm not very big. The whole time I was praying for him. Finally, the ambulance arrived. The paramedics worked around me while I kept going with the CPR. They took over and used a defibrillator on him. After a few minutes, he had a pulse again. It was such a relief to know he was going to be okay. The hospital sent me an email later to tell me he was fine. I'm really grateful that I was there to help, and it showed me how important first aid training is. It helped me stay calm and in control. And I'm not sure I would have been able to do that without the training. Story 23. Last night was really tough. I was making cookies because I had just gotten some nice cookie sheets for my birthday. I heard my best friend and roommate upstairs, screaming into the phone at her girlfriend. That wasn't too unusual, but the girl she's with now is really great, and I've never heard her scream like that at her before, only at her best friend. It was kind of crazy. I decided to leave it alone, but then she started screaming my name, so I ran upstairs. Her girlfriend travels out of state for 2 weeks at a time because she's a live-in nurse. This time, her patient got really sick and was in the hospital. Probably not going to live much longer, so the company put her in a hotel until they knew what was going to happen with the patient and they'd send her home. My roommate and I just come back from looking at houses to find a place for her and her girlfriend to live after her lease is up. I had cookies in the oven and dough in my hands when her girlfriend called to say goodnight. She'd gone to Chili's for dinner and had a few drinks, and she was outside her hotel room smoking when she called. A man who had been watching her smoke followed her up to her room, knocked on the door, forced his way in, and mistreated her. There was nothing I could do but try to calm my roommate down. I had to tell her over and over, "No, you can't go to her right now. The next flight is tomorrow and it costs $1,500. No, you can't call her right now even though you want to. She's with the hospital staff and the police. Please stop panicking. The neighbors will call the police if you don't stop." This went on for 5 hours. At the end, I did something that might not have been the best idea, but I thought it was necessary. I gave her some drinks to help her calm down. When she finally passed out on the couch, I grabbed some cushions and a blanket and slept on the floor next to her. Today, we picked up her girlfriend from the airport, and I'll finally be able to get some real sleep. Still can't believe this happened. You don't really understand pain until you see someone else going through something so terrible that you're not sure you could handle it yourself. There's nothing you can do to help them. Story 24. My girlfriend at the time, who is now my beautiful and loving wife, and I were lying in bed talking about having a baby and what we would name our hypothetical child. She was convinced she couldn't get pregnant because she had been in an 8-year marriage before me and never had a scare. So we both went to bed with heavy hearts, thinking it wasn't possible. The next day, around 4 or 5 in the evening, I took her to the emergency room because she was recovering from a clot in her lung, and I thought she might have pneumonia. It's always better to be safe than sorry. After some time, as they were running their tests, the doctor came in and said, "Did you know you were pregnant?" My girlfriend was like, "But I can't get pregnant. It's not possible." The doctor explained that there's a specific hormone they test for in the ER and then asked if she wanted to go for an ultrasound. She said she wanted to wait for me and have the test done again. I was outside smoking when this was happening. When I came into the little ER room she was in, her eyes were as big as dinner plates. She told me to sit down because she had something to tell me. I asked her what it was, and then something just tickled my heart. That's the best way I can describe it. I half-stated, half-asked, "You're pregnant, aren't you?" She then told me what the doctor had already said. We went down to the ultrasound, and he confirmed that she was indeed pregnant, and had been for 62 days. That was in 2014, and now we're the proud parents of a little baby girl. She has changed our lives in ways that are so profound and complete that I can't put it into words. My moment was when I saw that little baby come into this world. It was a "holy cow, this is happening" moment, but it was also a "dear God, wow" moment. You never know what you're going to wake up to. Story 25. I had just made a right turn at the stop sign. This road had 2 lanes on either side. I'm a stickler for the rules of the road, so I turned into the right-hand lane, then merged into the left, because I was going to be making a left turn shortly. I should note that the road I was on had a cement divider in the middle that ended at least 20 meters away from the stop. I merged, then had a brief moment, i.e. probably 3 to 5 seconds. My brain finally processed the fact that there was a car coming right at me in my lane. I merged back into the right lane, and watched as this car finally reached the end of the divider and merged back onto the proper side of the road. As I said, there was a cement divider along this road, and it started at the next intersection over. From my point of view, this means that this person somehow made an illegal turn to the right-hand side of the stretch, or was somehow already on the wrong side when they turned onto it. The worst part is, I actually saw pretty much the exact same situation a few days or weeks later. This time, I was headed in the same direction as the offending driver, so I was on the proper side of the divider, and the driver was ahead of me. Story 26. When I met my ex-girlfriend, she was determined to join the army and had decided not to be in a relationship when she left. For 11 months, we were in this weird stage where we were together, but not officially together. She refused to tell me she loved me, even though I knew she did, because she thought it would make it too hard for her to leave. Finally, she was accepted into the army. Her long-standing knee injury had been holding things up, but now it was certain that she was leaving. I guess I didn't react the way she wanted when she told me the good news. I explained to her that while she was making it easier on herself but not making us official, it made it harder for me. I was always wondering if my feelings were one-sided and if she had ever loved me, using me just to pass the time. After 30 minutes of silence, there was a knock on my door. She said, "I love you." We had 3 wonderful years together, but eventually the distance was too much for her. We've been apart for 2 years now, and although things didn't end well for a while, I have no regrets. I got everything I wanted from that relationship. Story 27. I'm a volunteer firefighter, and in 2013, my area experienced severe flooding. There was only one bridge crossing the river near where I live, so after I responded to emergencies and the water levels rose, I was unable to get back home. That night, around 24 of us were sleeping on the floor of the fire station because there were no beds. It's all volunteer run. We'd worked all day trying to control the river, which had become incredibly large and powerful. Normally, the river flows at about 4 to 5 cubic meters per second, which is around 1,000 to 1,300 gallons per second. But during the floods, it reached a peak of 560 cubic meters per second, nearly 150,000 gallons per second. The town where the fire station is located has a 3-kilometer-long earthen berm that protects it from the river. At about 2:30 in the morning, the crews that had taken over for us at 11 p.m. so we could rest were banging on the station doors to wake us up. The berm had been damaged. They estimated we had about 30 minutes before it would break and let the entire river flow into the town. We'd already evacuated all the civilians. There were about 1,500 people in town. But now we had to evacuate ourselves from the fire station, which felt like a second home to me. I joined the department in 1991 and had been on thousands of calls. We all rushed through the station, taking things off the walls, grabbing computers and other electronic equipment, packing up protective gear for other crews, and gathering station supplies. Everything that wasn't bolted down and even some things that were. We loaded everything into the fire trucks, leaving just before 3 a.m. for the local elementary school, which was on top of a hill and safe from the water. I was certain that by sunrise, the station, my sister's house, my colleagues' houses would all be gone. For 5 days, we operated out of the school, which we took over as our temporary fire station. We slept on gym mats and did what we could. The berm, it eroded down from over 100 feet wide in most places to just a few spots where only 4 inches of dirt were left between the river and the town. We were incredibly lucky. Since then, we've rebuilt the berm with cement and huge rocks to make it stronger.